Welcome to the European segment of this wonderful adventure for World Teachers' Day. I'm Christine Blower, President of ETUCE, the European region, and I'd just like to present my co-moderators. That's Christian Chevalier and Gelener, who are going to make sure this all goes really smoothly. So I'm looking very much forward to this brilliant section with input from all around our region. And let's just begin with a great round of applause from education workers from FECO, Spain. So happy World Teachers' Day to all. Perhaps some of you are singing along. And now it's my very great pleasure to introduce to you and to bring to the screen our European Director, Susan Flocken.
Happy World Teachers' Day. On World Teachers' Day, we celebrate the work, dedication and contribution of teachers to the provision of quality education for all students. This year, World Teachers' Day acknowledges the particular effort and commitment of teachers and their unions in taking the lead during and beyond the pandemic. Indeed, teachers are at the forefront in upholding quality education, having had to adapt practically overnight to a remote teaching environment, often rapidly self-training on applying new technologies, platforms, tools and devices. ETUCE and its member organizations' long-standing demands for equal access to quality education, decent working conditions and salaries, as well as more public funding for education to provide quality training for teachers, and most important, appropriate measures to ensure the well-being, health and safety of teachers and students are today more relevant than ever. Teachers and education personnel are the cornerstone of our society, and we owe them our recognition and respect for their daily work, perseverance and professionality in these exceptional times of emergency. Let's join together in thanking them by marking this day in solidarity across Europe and the world. Thank you. I wish all teachers and other education personnel happy World Teachers' Day.
Merci beaucoup Suzanne pour ce message plein d'optimisme. Le dialogue social, c'est, on le sait, toujours très important. Ça concerne les organisations syndicales, mais ça concerne évidemment aussi ceux qui sont de l'autre côté de la table, c'est-à-dire les gouvernants. Aussi, je vous propose d'écouter un message d'une ministre, la ministre fédérale de l'Éducation d'Allemagne, Anja Karliczek.
Heute ist Weltlehrertag, ein Tag, um Lehrerinnen und Lehrer gebührende Wertschätzung entgegenzubringen. Die Pandemie hat schonungslos offengelegt, wie anspruchsvoll ihre Arbeit ist und was sie damit für unsere Gesellschaft leisten. Liebe Lehrerinnen und Lehrer, die Zukunft ist geprägt davon, dass die Bildung noch mehr in den Mittelpunkt rückt. Denn den Wandel aller Lebensbereiche schaffen wir nur, wenn wir genügend gut ausgebildete Menschen in unserem Land haben. Und dann steht Ihre Arbeit wieder im Fokus. Denn Sie bereiten unsere Kinder und Jugendliche vor. Davon profitieren die jungen Menschen selbst, aber am Ende eben auch unsere ganze Gesellschaft. Und dafür gebührt Ihnen ganz großer Dank. Wir wissen, was Sie für uns tun. Die letzten Monate haben uns alle vor eine ganz große Herausforderung gestellt. Und Sie haben dazu beigetragen, den Unterricht während dieser Pandemie Tag für Tag aufrechtzuerhalten. Sie haben sich mit den Schulschließungen von einem Tag auf den anderen auf digitalen Unterricht umstellen müssen. Sie wurden von heute auf morgen vor Fragen gestellt: Wie erreiche ich alle Schülerinnen und Schüler? Welche Lehrmittel sind in dieser Situation die besten? Wie funktioniert das Computerprogramm? Es gab kein Patentrezept, keine Blaupause für diese Zeit. Sie mussten improvisieren und viele von ihnen sind in diesen Tagen über sich selbst hinausgewachsen. Sie haben aus der Not eine Tugend gemacht. Und dafür möchte ich Ihnen danken. Denn die Lage war und ist komplex und fordert uns alle sehr, bis heute. Schulen werden sich in den nächsten Jahren durch die Digitalisierung weiter verändern. Und ich bin überzeugt, durch den Digitalisierungsschub in unseren Schulen, den wir ja gerade erleben, machen die Schulen einen großen Sprung in die Zukunft. Die damit verbundenen Chancen sind groß, denn es geht darum, das Lernen und auch das Lehren mittels neuer Möglichkeiten besser und auch einfacher zu machen. Das soziale Miteinander und das Lernen in der Gemeinschaft bleibt mit neuen kreativen Unterstützungsmöglichkeiten. Und gleichzeitig dürfen wir nicht vergessen, wir leben immer noch in der Pandemie und haben bis auf Weiteres keinen Normalbetrieb in den Schulen. Es ist gut und richtig, so viel Normalität wie möglich zu schaffen. Aber vieles wird uns gemeinsam gelingen, wenn wir mit ein wenig Disziplin, Abstand halten, Hygienemaßnahmen einhalten und Masken tragen an diese Zeit herangehen. Natürlich ist es anstrengend. Und wenn wir alle unser Bestes geben, dann kann auch dieses Schuljahr gelingen. Wir werden später darauf zurückschauen, mit Stolz und Freude, es geschafft zu haben. Herzlichen Dank.
Following the supportive message we received from Germany, now I would like to welcome the Prime Minister of Norway to share her message, Mrs. Erna Solberg.
Kjære alle sammen. Henrik Asheim sammenlignet en gang verdens lærerdag med morsdagen. Vi vet at vi bør takke oftere. Det er jeg helt enig i. Og i 2020 får vi knapt takket dere nok. For selv i en normal situasjon har lærerne kanskje Norges viktigste jobb. Dere sikrer barna våre en utdanning de vil vokse på og leve av. Dere gir omsorg og oppmerksomhet. Mange setter egne liv på pause for å støtte andre i sine. I år har dere strukket strikken ekstra langt. Dere stilte opp da samfunnet trengte dere som mest. Det gjør meg veldig stolt og takknemlig. Men også ydmyk. For jeg vet at det har kostet mye. Og jeg vet at det er tungt at korona vil prege hverdagen for lærere både i skolen og barnehagen en stund til. Men vit det, kjære lærer. Det er lite som gjør meg tryggere på at våre barn er i gode hender, enn tanken på at vi har dere. Gratulerer så mye med verdens lærerdag, og tusen takk for jobben dere gjør, for barna, for landet og for fremtiden vår.
Great message there from Norway. And now we move to some messages from all around our region here in Europe. We have a message from the Czech Republic, one from Russia, one from Bulgaria, one from Cyprus, and finally one from Portugal. So let's hear those.
I would like to greet all teachers around the world and wish them the best of their World Teachers' Day today. During the pandemic, teachers showed that they were prepared and able to adapt quickly to the new situation and challenges. During the time of the pandemic and after it, we would clearly see that the concept of responsibility and care has re-entered our lives in a more intensive way than ever. Nobody was happy about the situation, but we all did our best to maintain the access to quality education for all children and students. Our Czech teachers did their best so that no one is left behind in those difficult times.
Дорогие коллеги, друзья, очень рада, что в рамках проводимой акции «Интернационалом образования» я сегодня имею возможность поздравить не только учителей России, а учителей из стран мира с нашим самым главным и замечательным праздником – Международным днем учителя. Учитель – уникальная профессия, профессия дальнего действия, как мы называем. От учителя во многом зависит от того, с каким образовательным, воспитательным багажом дети выйдут после окончания школы в реальную жизнь, какую профессию, какой жизненный путь они определят для себя в дальнейшем. Сегодня, когда мы переживаем очень серьезную ситуацию, связанную с развитием пандемии, учителя предпринимают героические усилия для обеспечения образовательного процесса в дистанционном режиме. И в этой ситуации, на наш взгляд, и в обществе приходит большее понимание, сколь важна и сколько сложна профессия учителя. Я хочу поздравить вас, уважаемые, дорогие учителя, с этим замечательным праздником и пожелать вам сил, здоровья, а в сегодняшней ситуации это особенно важно, позитива, оптимизма. И мы уверены, что все сложности, которые встают на нашем пути, вы обязательно преодолеете. И мы, как профсоюз, мы всегда рядом, мы вместе. С праздником, дорогие! Всего вам самого-самого.
По инициатива на интернационално образованието и на Европейския синдикален комитет по образование, всички страни членки на Европейския съюз и в това число България, Синдиката на българските учители, честваме 5 октомври, Международния ден на учителя в една нетипична училищна среда, поради това, че заболяването COVID-19 настъпва много сериозно в българските училища, но Синдиката на българските учители с достоинство и с много добър старт на учебната година с подписването на новия колективен трудов договор, където договорихме 17% увеличение на работните заплати от 1 януари 2021 година, както и други допълнителни плащания. Стартирахме учебната година и на 5 октомври се създаде една много благоприятна среда за честване на Международния ден на учителя във всички училища и детски градини. Не можахме да направим масови мероприятия заради COVID, но в Свищов проведахме една конференция, свързана с ролята на младите учители. Предстои ни още една конференция в Хисера за ролята на младия учител с цел повишаване качеството на учебно-възпитателния процес, както и направихме предложение за изменение на наредбата за получаване на учителска правоспособност с промяната на учебните планове и програми във висшите училища, което е изключително важно от гледна точка на бъдещата подготовка на младите учители, които излизат от университетите. Настояваме всички учители да бъдат магистри, както и повече стажански практики в българското училище на бъдещите учители, изучаването на повече часове по възрастова психология и създаването на добри условия за обучение по приобщаващото образование, гражданско образование, екологично образование и други важни дисциплини, които са нужни и потребни за днешното време в условията на дигитализация на образователната система. Така че българската образователна система, Синдиката на българските учители, нашите членове са горди от това, че са част от голямата общност на световното учителско движение и това, че българската делегация в ООН подкрепи 5 октомври да бъде Международен ден на учителя. Честита на всички учители по света. 5 октомври, Международния ден на учителя и на добър час.
We have to create a common voice against the war, armaments and guns selling in the world. Conflict, another problem. Teachers, not only teaching in the classroom, but also raise our voice against all kinds of discrimination in the world. These are the key role of the teachers. If we would like to create a peaceful world, we have to believe that peace is a virtue. We have to teach in the classroom, we have to teach to politicians, we have to fight for global solidarity, global problems. In that sense, I would like to say that teachers are the creator of the new generations. Teachers are the engineers of the world.
Em Portugal e em todo o mundo, temos vivido uma situação extraordinária que fez emergir respostas educativas totalmente novas e que nunca tinham sido imaginadas. À surpresa das novas circunstâncias impostas pela pandemia, teve de se associar a capacidade para, de um dia para o outro, alterar rotinas e experimentar novas formas de organização da sociedade e do processo de ensino-aprendizagem. Neste contexto, os educadores e professores portugueses foram inexcedíveis no trabalho que desenvolveram, procurando colmatar as enormes insuficiências, tantas vezes sublinhadas, de um sistema de educação e formação no qual tão pouco se tem investido ao longo de tantos e tantos anos. Foi a ação direta dos educadores e professores portugueses que promoveu o facto de milhares de alunos não perderem a ligação às suas escolas e ao desenvolvimento dos conteúdos programáticos. E muita gente, muitos políticos, reconheceram esse enorme esforço e essa enorme mobilização. Mas agora é preciso que esse reconhecimento se traduza na valorização destes trabalhadores. É preciso que a precariedade seja substituída pela estabilidade. É preciso que os jovens tenham direito a uma perspectiva de emprego estável. É preciso que se assegure que há um regular desenvolvimento de carreiras que reconheça o trabalho que é desenvolvido com tanto empenho nas nossas escolas. É preciso que a aposentação seja atingida em tempo e em condições que permitam a vida com dignidade àquelas e àqueles que se entregaram com empenho às suas profissões. É preciso que se respeitem os limites do tempo de trabalho e que se promova realmente a conciliação do tempo de vida profissional com o respeito pela vida pessoal e familiar. É preciso que o sistema de educação e formação assegure a equidade no acesso à educação e à formação e também ao sucesso dos percursos escolares. É preciso desenhar e promover um horizonte de justiça e de respeito para o futuro de todos nós. É por isso que neste dia 5 de outubro de 2020, Dia Mundial do Professor, a Federação Nacional da Educação, FNE, afirma que este também tem de ser tempo de esperança num futuro melhor. Não só em termos de saúde, claro, mas também em termos de vida profissional. Nos tempos difíceis, dissemos presente. Agora projetamos um futuro de valorização.
Bien, merci pour ces témoignages qui montrent une fois de plus que les enseignants et leurs syndicats sont en première ligne sur le Covid, mais comme ça a été dit, en première ligne pour préserver la paix, en première ligne pour préserver la justice sociale. Mais la crise du Covid, avec l'enseignement à distance, a montré combien il a fallu s'adapter et évidemment transformer le métier puisqu'on travaillait depuis chez soi. Donc je vous propose sur cette question des évolutions et au fond de la difficulté parfois à concilier la vie familiale et la vie professionnelle, d'écouter un échange entre Rosella Benedetti de l'UL Scola Italie et de Valérie Kessy, qui est militante syndicale à la CSQ du Canada, du Québec pour être précis.
Alors, bonjour, je suis Rosella Benedetti, je suis la responsable des relations internationales de mon organisation UL Scola en Italie. Je suis aussi présidente du comité permanent pour l'égalité du CSE, qui est la région européenne des liés, et je suis aussi un prof de lycée. Et nous, on est là aujourd'hui pour parler des difficultés à concilier le travail et la vie privée pendant la pandémie mondiale pour les enseignants. Et même avant, il faut dire, même s'il y a un stéréotype qui concerne les enseignants, et tout le monde pense que les enseignants, c'est quelque chose de tranquille à enseigner et que les enseignants ont plein de temps pour concilier la vie privée avec les travail. Ça, on sait très bien que ce n'est plus vrai depuis des décennies. Les enseignants sont ils ont des problèmes d'horaire, ils ont des problèmes de déplacement pour rejoindre les écoles où ils travaillent, les établissements scolaires où ils travaillent. Ils ont aussi beaucoup de travail à faire, donc le travail derrière les cours, c'est très lourd, c'est pas facile à faire, donc et pourtant il y a toujours ce stéréotype qui nous concerne. Mais avec la pandémie, on a vu que les problèmes sont tous ressortis, tous ensemble. Parce que pendant la pandémie, on a découvert et l'IE a fait aussi de rencontres en ligne entre les différentes régions pour parler de ça. On a découvert que, en effet, les enseignants sont aussi des parents. Ils ont aussi des enfants à la maison, mais en même temps, ils devaient travailler tout le temps pour suivre les enfants des autres. Parce que c'est ça qui s'est passé. Et les familles et les parents des élèves demandent des horaires différents pour organiser le travail à la maison, parce que tout le monde est en ligne. On ne peut pas être en ligne tout le monde au même moment. Donc, le travail a augmenté. Il n'y avait plus d'horaires. Les horaires n'existaient plus pour les enseignants. Et en plus, les enseignants, ils ont dû changer complètement la façon dont ils organisaient le travail didactique. Donc, la pédagogie aussi, le côté pédagogique a été changé complètement. Et donc, les enseignants, ils ont dû faire beaucoup d'efforts pour changer, pour organiser. Et les chefs d'établissement demandent aux enseignants de faire des réunions de plus en plus longues, de plus en plus nombreuses. Donc, ça veut dire qu'en effet, les enseignants ont été en ligne tout le temps. Et ça a été un poids très lourd, un fardeau pour les enseignants qu'il faut reconnaître et montrer clairement aux familles, aux parents et à l'administration. Donc, nous, on est là en ce moment pour échanger avec une collègue du Canada, Valérie Kessy. Bonjour. Une enseignante au primaire depuis 15 ans, graduée à l'Université du Québec à Trois-Rivières et qui est mère de des garçons de 10 et 6 ans. Donc, qui peut mieux nous expliquer comment une enseignante qui travaille de chez elle, qui enseigne à distance ou en présentiel, je ne sais pas si en ces moments au Canada on enseigne en présentiel, mais certainement pendant le confinement vous avez dû enseigner à distance comme tout le monde. Qu'est-ce qui s'est passé Si vous pouvez nous parler un peu de votre expérience personnelle concernant la recherche d'un équilibre entre d'une part l'enseignement à distance et le suivi de vos étudiants et d'autre part la gestion de votre vie privée et familiale, le tout depuis votre domicile, ce qui s'est passé entre tout le monde.
Oui, bonjour. Je vous dirais que c'était une charge mentale assez grande pour moi quand les écoles ont fermé en mars dernier. Je me suis retrouvée à la maison avec, vous l'avez dit, mes 2 garçons, un de niveau préscolaire, puis l'autre de niveau primaire. Mais mon plus grand garçon, lui, vit avec un spectre de l'autisme. Alors, pour lui, la routine était super importante. Il y avait déjà sa routine d'aller à l'école qui était bien établie depuis quelques années. Là, on venait en un claquement de doigts de tout changer. Donc ça a été très difficile là, à la maison d'établir un horaire pour lui, aussi pour mon plus petit. Puis donc, je vous dirais que j'ai placardé les murs d'affiches d'horaires et d'activités, essayer de varier les activités là, dans le premier 2 semaines là, après les fermetures parce qu'on était comme en arrêt. Je n'avais pas le suivi à faire avec mes élèves, mais en même temps, je me questionnais puis je m'inquiétais quand même de leur réussite de la maison. Je ne savais pas trop vers où on s'en allait avec ça. Mais pendant ces 2 semaines-là, j'ai tout mis en place pour mes garçons. Puis après ça, là est arrivé le moment de faire le suivi à la maison et d'envoyer des activités à la maison à mes élèves. Je vous dirais que souvent, la difficulté, c'était de rejoindre mes élèves à un moment opportun parce que tous les parents étaient en télétravail aussi de la maison. Donc, j'avais des moments propices pour les rejoindre. En même temps, j'avais mes 2 garçons, moi, à la maison, à qui j'essayais de faire les apprentissages en même temps. Donc, ça a été beaucoup d'ajustements, puis énormément de difficultés là, pour rejoindre les autres enfants, là, des élèves que j'avais.
Donc, oui, évidemment, vous avez parlé des charges mentales et il faut dire qu'une des initiatives qu'on a prises en Italie, mon organisation a été celle de offrir aux travailleurs, à nos affiliés, un soutien psychologique. Parce que la charge mentale a été vraiment très forte et surtout au début, tout le monde craignait de tomber, les risques de tomber malade étaient forts pour tout le monde, donc tout le monde était stressé et était à la maison, il fallait travailler. Donc, ma deuxième question regarde les autorités du Québec. Vous croyez que les autorités éducatives du Québec avaient réfléchi à la manière dont les enseignants pourraient concilier vie professionnelle et vie privée alors que le travail se faisait à la maison pendant les confinements? Et ont-ils fourni aux enseignants un soutien quelconque dont vos collègues avaient pu bénéficier ou pas?
Je vous dirais qu'ici au Québec, il y a comme 3 paliers d'autorité d'enseignement. Au départ, je pense que le ministère, quand la fermeture des écoles est arrivée, n'avait pas de plan de match. Donc, le temps que ça a pris pour mettre tout à exécution, ils ont fait ça rapidement, mais nous, on était quand même dans le questionnement. Donc là, ils ont ouvert des sites Internet, exemple l'école ouverte, ça permettait aux parents d'aller chercher des activités d'apprentissage pour aider leurs enfants là, dans le premier 2 semaines d'arrêt qu'on a eu. Les parents avaient accès à ce site-là et en tout temps durant le confinement aussi, ils pouvaient télécharger là, des activités pour essayer d'aider leurs enfants, mais on s'entend que aussi les parents, c'est pas tous des enseignants. Donc, moi, étant enseignante, je savais un peu comment m'y prendre avec mes enfants, mais pour un parent qui n'est pas enseignant, ça devait être assez difficile là, de faire des apprentissages à la maison là, pour leurs enfants, pour certains en tout cas. Ensuite de ça, comme vous, nous, notre centre de service scolaire nous a offert dès le départ là, un soutien psychologique gratuit là, à tous les enseignants, à tous les employés qui en avaient besoin. Donc, ils ont été présents dès le début à ce niveau-là. Puis, le troisième palier, ben ça, c'est nos directions d'école de chaque établissement. Eux, ben, ils nous rencontraient virtuellement, bien sûr. On ne pouvait pas être en présentiel, donc on avait des rencontres virtuelles pour nous aider, nous accompagner et tout ça. Puis, mais pour avoir parlé avec certains collègues, il y a certaines directions d'école, des fois, qui mettaient plus de pression que d'autres. Fait qu'on n'a pas tous vécu le même confinement puis la même façon de travailler, là.
Eh oui, eh oui. Et nous avons passé un drôle de moment et comme chez vous, chez nous aussi, il y a eu des parents qui ont craqué, vraiment, qui ont continué à harceler les enseignants parce qu'ils n'arrivaient pas à suivre les enfants. C'est là qu'ils ont compris, c'est que c'était avoir les enfants à l'école et avec des professeurs qui s'occupaient d'eux et donc qui les suivaient et avoir les mêmes enfants à la maison tout le temps et devoir aussi en même temps travailler avec des enfants qui, surtout certains enfants, surtout les ados, n'étaient pas très contents de suivre ou chercher à échapper aux leçons vidéo et tout ça. Donc, ça a été vraiment un moment où les familles ont craqué, il faut dire ça. Et heureusement, certains ils ont compris l'importance de l'enseignement de l'école, mais d'autres, non. Ça a aggravé la façon dont ces relations, ils parlent avec les institutions scolaires. Et ma dernière question regarde les syndicats. Qu'en est-il du syndicat? Comment votre syndicat vous a-t-il soutenu? Et suggérez-vous au syndicat de faire, qu'est-ce que vous suggérez au syndicat de faire qu'il ne fasse pas déjà?
Je vous dirais qu'ici, au Québec, on est choyé. Dès le départ, on était super bien épaulés là, par nos syndicats. On a la Fédération des syndicats de l'enseignement qui, elle, dès le départ, elle nous a soutenus, elle nous a aidés à baisser notre niveau de stress, d'angoisse, parce que, veux pas, on était inquiets face à nos élèves, mais aussi face à tout ce qui arrivait avec la pandémie. On n'avait jamais vécu un confinement comme ça, donc ils ont été présents. Nous, notre fédération avait un rendez-vous quotidien avec le ministre de l'Éducation. Donc, ça nous permettait d'avoir l'information claire rapidement sur les différentes demandes là, du gouvernement. Ça permettait aussi de dédramatiser un peu tout ça. Puis aujourd'hui, nos syndicats continuent encore à nous épauler parce qu'on a quand même encore beaucoup de consignes sanitaires à suivre à l'école. Donc, la charge mentale n'est pas disparue. Mais oui, présentement, on est en présentiel, mais on a beaucoup de consignes à respecter, là, la distanciation, la désinfection et tout ça. Donc, le syndicat est toujours là à tous les jours pour essayer de nous donner des consignes claires à suivre.
Ben oui, je trouve que dans plusieurs pays, le rôle des syndicats a été très important pour arriver à des règles communes pour ouvrir les écoles aussi, mais aussi pour régler les travail du personnel, des enseignants, du personnel non enseignant, du personnel de soutien, de façon que tout le monde puisse continuer à faire son travail, mais en même temps, ne pas risquer surtout la santé, la sécurité de son travail à l'école. Donc, je crois que d'après tous les échanges que j'ai eus dans les derniers mois, je vois que vraiment là où il y a eu un peu de dialogue social, il y a eu des négociations, il y a eu un rôle des syndicats reconnu par le gouvernement, ça a marché mieux que dans les autres pays. Et il faut reconnaître qu'aussi la solidarité nous a servi à quelque chose parce que nous avons échangé des informations et nous avons pu utiliser ces informations pour faire pression sur nos gouvernements. Donc, je vous remercie, Valérie. Je vous souhaite bon travail. J'espère qu'on pourra se revoir bientôt en présence. Merci.
Okay, so now we're hoping to move to our next session, which will be a dialogue about technology, but we're just going to entertain a little discussion amongst ourselves. I think one of the things that the pandemic has shown is that technology cannot replace teachers. There are things that technology can do, but they cannot replace teachers in total. So, Süleyman, I wonder if you have an observation.
Indeed, very true. Actually, all across the social media platforms, teachers are sharing tips, ideas, technologies, and learning management strategies. And this is happening from our homes. It's from our bedrooms, from our kitchens, from our internet hotspots, and we are very socially distanced from classrooms. So as schools are slowly opening, now we are trying to configure how to combine this. And actually, we just found ourselves in this. So teachers, as always, had to be creative and innovative on the spot, and they had to come up with ideas. Of course, there was various issues on this, because some of the information you can get from Education International, it says that nearly half of the world's population has no access to the internet. And this creates more and more inequalities between this and also the school.
Je crois,
oui, bien sûr,
je crois aussi, Christian, que le problème qu'on a vu, que c'est justement la question d'inégalité entre les étudiants, entre les familles, avec la clôture des établissements scolaires, et la technologie n'a pas pu remplacer. Mais,
bien sûr, on a
comme ça en France.
beaucoup de difficultés. D'abord, les enseignants ont découvert, pour un certain nombre d'entre eux, le numérique et l'usage du numérique. Et ce que l'on a pu observer, c'est qu'un certain nombre de familles, un certain nombre d'enfants n'avaient pas accès au numérique. Et c'est là où on voit que la présence des enseignants, le contact direct avec les enseignants, des enseignants avec les familles, avec le jeune, est extrêmement important. En France, on estime à plus de 100 000 les jeunes qui ont décroché du système éducatif, c'est-à-dire qui n'ont rien appris, même à distance, même avec le numérique. Donc, on a là un enjeu qui est un enjeu extrêmement important, qui est un enjeu de formation des enseignants, qui est aussi un enjeu d'équipement des élèves, d'équipement des familles. Mais on voit bien que le numérique est un outil pédagogique nouveau, mais il ne suffit pas. Il est extrêmement important que l'enseignant continue à être un ingénieur pédagogique qui est dans un travail qui est un travail relationnel, et ce travail relationnel, il passe par aussi des contacts physiques qui sont extrêmement utiles et importants dans les apprentissages des jeunes.
Merci, Christian. I think we're now in a position where we can go to our expert, who is Christina J. Kolkoff, and I have the questions which we're ready to put to her. So, Christina, thank you so much for joining us. Our first question, given that you've done a huge amount of work making unions aware of the pitfalls of data protection and so on, what do you think are the must-dos for education unions to protect their members in this area? What must we absolutely do?
Capacity build, capacity build, capacity build. You know, it's not just in education unions, it's across all unions in all sectors. We really need to up the ante, so to speak, in relation to understanding these digital tools, understanding, you know, what are the building blocks of an algorithm, you know, knowing what questions to ask. So You know, I'm helping a lot of unions to train not only the union leadership, the secretariats, but of course also the members in understanding these things. And this is something we urgently need to do.
Well, that's a great answer, especially with the problem of algorithms, of which certainly teachers in the UK and Ireland are only too familiar with that,
Yes.
with the exam table we have. But I mean, I'm sure in other jurisdictions too. So let me just ask you this. You have a very strong focus in your work on the governance of data, as you just said, and algorithmic systems. So what role do unions have in governing these systems? And how do you think education unions can influence government to give them more say about teachers and students' data and how it's used and what mechanisms we should be trying to put in place? Because we know data is money.
You say that again, sorry?
We know that data is money. Data is monetized all over the place, isn't it?
Yes,
So,
and it shouldn't be, right? This is the problem number one. The moment we see data as a commodity that can be bought and sold is the moment we transcend the human rights, our privacy rights. Then we subordinate those rights to monetary value. So this is something that I think I really agree with Professor Zuzana Supoff, who says we should ban all markets and human futures. So this predictive analysis and so on. But going back to your first part of your question, I think what education unions really have to understand is that this whole ed tech, so the technology of education, is such a huge market, predicted to rise to $285 billion in just 3 or 4 years. So, you know, when we've capacity built, so we know what we're talking about, we know what critical questions to ask, we should then start really looking into, number one, what systems are in place in our workplaces, in our schools, who owns these systems? Is it proprietary systems that have been brought in and just implemented without further ado? We should be working very closely, demanding very clear demands with our education authorities. Why are they recommending or buying in these systems? What agreements do they have with these private tech companies around joint data access and control, for example? You know, I was spooked recently at a UNESCO event where a representative from one of these edtech companies was giving a speech, and slide number 2, I think it was, we are extracting 50 million data points a day on our edtech, so on students, on children, right? And I then asked him, I said, well, what privacy rights, concerns do you have for the children here? Oh, our data is anonymized, he said. Now, we then have to be smart enough to know where everything anonymized can be very quickly de-anonymized. So this is a brilliant case of where are the education authorities in this? What demands do they have? And what demands should the teachers and the unions have in each and every learning institution around this massive data extraction?
Thank you so much for that, Christina. I think we have Larry with us in the green room, and I wonder if he would like to come in and ask maybe just one more question, because to stay on schedule, we've only really got time for one more. So, Larry, do you want to ask maybe one of the last questions that you had on the list?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Christine. Evening, Christina. Apologies for being late. I was on Scottish time, which is apparently very peculiar. I'm just very interested in terms of, as a practitioner, the role of teachers in relation to, if you like, data literacy, so that you're talking about the protections we need to put in place, but as educators, we also have a function in terms of developing an understanding on the part of tomorrow's citizens. So I wonder what your views were on that particular challenge.
Yeah, it's a great question, Larry, because let's be honest, everybody listening to this who's above the age of, I would say, 35, we've got a lot to answer for, right? We sleepwalked into this situation. We never asked, why is Google Chrome free? Why is Facebook for free? Why are all of these apps on my smartphone free? We were never critical towards that. It wasn't until, Cambridge Analytica Facebook scandal that some people started thinking, So, the education, being very aware of what are the price, nothing is free. There's nothing called a free lunch. So what are we giving away when we're using all of these digital services? How can we protect our identities? What information should we put on social media so it doesn't come haunting us later in life when we're trying to find a job or something, right? How can we respect the privacy of others? A simple thing is, if I walk into anybody's home, which happens less and less now because of COVID, but I ask them, do you have an Amazon Alexa or Google Home device? If they do, I ask them to turn it off because I don't want my privacy rights violated. So, it's essential that we teach children to be critical, to be very careful of what they post online, to be aware that there's nothing called a free lunch, and that we talk, virtual private networks with them and so on and so forth. So yeah, we have to, I think, a bit of redemption time there because we played our part in ending where we are right now, which is not a good spot.
Well, I think Larry and Christina, there's a lot for us to think about there, and it's certainly work. Larry, I know that ETUCE has been focused on for a while. So if you have a last remark, Larry or Christina, and then we'll think on about how this can work for us, but what we shouldn't be doing.
Well, I suppose just following on from Christina's comments there about the role of educators, but you are, Christina, essentially still optimistic that we can control this beast in a sense. We don't have to be victims of AI. We can actually still assert our own control over it.
Well, I am, but I would also say we have to hurry up. Right, we really have to hurry up as unions, as workers, and say, hey, I'm not going to be subject to all of your opaque algorithmic influences and so on. We demand insight. We demand the right to say no. We demand the right to collectivize our data and build data trust, so we can tell our version of the story. Data and all of this is not more clever than the eyes that are analyzing it. And at the moment, we're subject to a very unilateral, corporate-driven version of identity. So tech is not born evil. Tech is not born good either. And we really need to push our governments to put better regulations in place to control this so it serves people and planet. That's great. Christina, thank you very much. And thank you for joining us. Larry, you can get back to Scottish time now. And happy World Teachers' Day to everyone in Scotland. So thank you very much to you two for that really interesting discussion and work, as I say, that ETUCE, that the European region has already been focusing on. Now, as we all know, we're in the middle of a public health crisis, a pandemic. And so it's not surprising, but it's very pleasing that we are now joined in a message by the World Health Organization Director General, Tedros Adhanom. And he will then be followed by Annie Sparrow, who is live and will be answering some questions. So we'll take the video now. Thank you.
WHO sees teachers as playing an irreplaceable role in children's lives. First in their physical, mental and social health, and subsequently in their capacity to live well and contribute to society through their life course. You're on the front lines of the response to ensure that learning continues for nearly 1.5 billion students. Today, in the time of the worst pandemic the world has seen in 100 years, we in the international community recognize the importance of safeguarding the right to education. And that means taking all measures possible to protect both students and teachers against the risk of being infected with the virus that causes COVID-19. The pandemic has taught us who society's essential workers are. Health workers, who are the custodians of our physical and mental health and well-being. Teachers and education workers, who are the guardians of our most precious investment. The children, who are the promise of our collective future. We owe teachers the conditions, the resources, the pay, the training, the support, and the respect they deserve. Most importantly, we owe educators our patience, understanding, and solidarity. Long-term school closures may have severe negative impact on children's health and well-being and on their educational progress. Now, many schools have taken measures to reopen safely. Recently, WHO, together with UNESCO and UNICEF, published considerations for school-related public health measures in the context of COVID-19. This document looks at school operations, including openings, closures, and reopenings, and the measures needed to minimize the risk to students and staff of illness with COVID-19. We hope it will prove to be useful for decision makers in your countries. Schools are more than places for children to learn. For many millions of children, it's the place where they receive nourishing meals, maybe the one meal they need per day. Opportunities for physical activity and important health services, including immunization. For many, it's the main place they learn about health and staying healthy. Schools are places where students develop behaviors and habits they carry into adulthood. In the context of COVID-19, schools can help provide sound guidance to children and their families, prevent the spread of misinformation, and put fears into perspective. They can also promote important behaviors such as hand hygiene and respiratory etiquette. Reopening schools enables these supportive interventions to be renewed. It also provides a welcome environment for teachers to provide evidence-based, age and curriculum appropriate information about COVID-19 to children and young people, to promote coping mechanisms and identify stress, and to encourage children to ask questions. We hope a positive outcome of this terrible virus will be to encourage young people to consider studying to become health workers and teachers, where we have plenty of jobs waiting.
Okay. Hello. Hi, Annie Sparrow.
Hi, David. Great to see you.
Great to see you. We just heard from Dr. Tedros, but we had some more questions that came for us from teachers around the world who are following the broadcast. And we're just really, really honored to have you with us, not just as a friend of EI, but as a global expert in your own right who has vast experience and knowledge and someone we're really eager to talk to. So we had 3 questions that we picked that sort of floated up to the top in terms of what our members, what teachers really want to know. One of them has to do with your previous experience of health emergencies and outbreaks such as Ebola, and sort of what's the difference this time around?
Well, and thank you, because it is a pleasure to be here. And I think this is just one of the most important things that we could, the most important thing that we could be discussing right now. I think that what we have learned from previous pandemics is that we haven't really learned enough. But what COVID has shown us is that foundational to everything else is our health. We can't get anything done without it. But as part of that, education is absolutely critical. And what we have done with COVID is we have had this sort of blunt response. We've shut down everything out of a combination of complacency, fear, denial, and then panic, and then you have this complete shutdown. And part of that is also, of course, because China was slow to actually acknowledge that there was respiratory transmission. It covered up all the health workers who are actually been infected. There's this, and it sort of inferred this focus on hand hygiene, which means that we didn't actually think about, respiratory airborne transmission. And that's led us down this path of then shutting down schools, because we know that schools are hotspots for influenza. But playing COVID by the influenza playbook doesn't work, because it's a different disease. And we can see that very clearly. And so in shutting down schools, we have done, we have actually, it's a man-made sort of catastrophic, we have created this. And I say this as a doctor, where our first sort of precept is meant to be first do no harm. Hippocrates did say that, but not in terms of clinical medicine. He said that in terms of diseases and epidemics. And he said, do something useful and look to the future about what you will do, but first do no harm. And what we have done, of course, is created enormous harm by shutting down the schools and spawned these parallel pandemics in child marriage, child labor. Tens of millions of girls are probably never going to come back. We have, we're seeing these enormously, the increase in mental health issues, anxiety and depression and eating disorders and suicide. And some of these are very well documented already in places like Australia. And of course, physical health, kids are becoming more obese. And, so there's a whole sort of a range of physical, mental, emotional, social issues. And all of those are addressed at school. And here's the thing that I think now we can see how absolutely essential teachers are and schools are, because education is on paper, is the third most important determinant of health. But in reality, it's the single most important, because the others being income and whether you have a job. How do you achieve that? With education. With every year of education, you have it has a knock-on effect and increases your life expectancy. It increases your health at every level. It means you are much more likely to get a job, and you are going to be protected with that educational attainment for the rest of your life. It can't ever be taken away from you. But that's what we have done now. So the teachers are absolutely critical in actually, because we can't do anything about the poverty. We can't do anything about the unemployment. We can do something about education, and we need to actually, get that going as soon as possible, because we have not only left, up nearly 1 billion kids, sort of stranded, as it were, and so many of them are already disadvantaged, and we know that. But we know that now how absolutely essential teachers are to actually kickstarting and reopening not only our societies now, but our futures, our economies, our ability to withstand the next pandemic. So we need to be really smart about this one. And in terms of the other things we've learned the importance of trust. And it doesn't even matter, like when our vaccines come out, we must protect our teachers as part of that front line. Teachers are primarily getting infected in the communities, not in schools, but they need to be protected because they are on the front line, and we see how important they are. But vaccines don't work by themselves. It's the vaccination. And how do you generate the trust? That has to be, that's done by the teachers. We trust our teachers in the same way that we trust our churches and our doctors. I mean, they are a fundamental community resource because they're vocational. They're in it because they love, what they do, and they're doing it for that reason. So they don't have, their primary agenda is, as Dr. Tedros just said, is that we are in it for the kids, and their kids are our common ground. They're our future. They're our best hope for a future and our best reason for doing so. And schools are the real sort of literal common ground where that happens, and which provides the physical protection and the connectivity and the place in which we can actually really, sort of build back better. And yeah, anyway, that's probably enough of a response.
Yeah, no, it's a great response. It's a great response, Annie. And we've talked about this so many times. And, one of the things that teachers are now writing to us about and writing to you about is that they feel sort of kind of in the middle, because obviously they're worried about their students. Obviously they're seeing the child marriage, the health, all those types of issues, and they want to do the right thing, but yet they're also worried about their own children, people of certain age or illness in their own homes. And they're sort of pressed there between their sort of professional obligations and their personal, rights. And so one of the things they're talking about is a lot of the fact that they're not getting the information they need, they're not getting the support that they need from governments, and sort of clearly making sure that they have those things that you were so clearly laying out that they need to be able to be protected. So talk a little bit just in terms of if they're going to be frontline workers and they're going to be trusted in building the trust, what do you think needs to be assured for them as frontline workers with rights so that they can be protected and also be part of the solution and not just sort of as a pawn in a game, but actually, you know, what kind of recommendations would you make?
Well, the fundamental thing about pandemics and that we have learned so clearly is that all of this focus on biomedical solutions. And by the way, I think we have really reached the end of this. I mean, we focus on vaccines and we focus on treatments as if that were the be-all and end-all, but that subordinates people to the disease. And we've really reached the end of that model. So now we have to actually return to a people-focused model. And the reason why that's so important is that we've seen this in other epidemics. With Ebola, for example, in Eastern Congo, we had the vaccines right from the beginning, first epidemic ever. We also had the treatments within months, actually. Did we have the trust? No. And trust comes from, at this stage in particular, at this era, where everything is so heavily politicized. Will you trust, Trump? Will you trust necessarily your government? What has to happen is that dialogue. And we saw this with HIV. Like if we wanted to, if we wanted to protect the truckies or highly mobile populations, they needed to hear that message from, their unions because they could trust them, for example. So we have to have dialogue between governments and teachers and all of the, and the parents and the members of civil society and all of those who are involved in this, because that's the only way to generate this trust and transparency that allows this to go forward. So whether we're talking about uptake of vaccines or how to protect, it's not just, of course, the classrooms and the schools, but it's the public transport systems or how you actually get to school and how do you actually make the whole community safe. There's an enormous gap in policy and in funding around this issue, and that needs to be addressed too. We need to actually have policies about how you're going to fund, how we're going to build schools back better, so we put in a school nurse and everything. So we build in ability to test so that, you can discern the difference between strep throat and COVID or malaria and COVID. And as Dr. Tedros pointed out, we need to, they are already places of nutrition, but they could, schools all over the world are trusted community resources. So let's take advantage of that, and let's take advantage of the teachers who are right there and they know how to protect their kids. So let's listen to them too. And that is an extraordinarily important conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you. So you're basically setting us up. You're saying take the lead, exactly what we're trying to do with this conversation. You're telling us to keep doing this, doing more. And actually, we have another panel, which is going to take this even further. So for all of you, follow Annie on Twitter. Follow Dr. Tedros on Twitter. We'll continue the conversation with her, with EI, and I'm going to turn it back over to Christian Chevalier. Thank you very much, Annie.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Merci, Dr. Sparrow, et merci, David, pour cet échange. Effectivement, le mot confiance est un mot extrêmement important dans cette période. On l'a vu, pendant le confinement, les écoles ont été fermées plusieurs semaines, parfois plusieurs mois, ce qui n'était pas arrivé dans l'histoire de la plupart de nos pays depuis sans doute la nuit des temps, ou en tout cas depuis fort longtemps, sauf peut-être en période de guerre. Aujourd'hui, les écoles sont en train de réouvrir. Et on voit bien que cette réouverture interroge, pose beaucoup de questions. C'est un sujet particulièrement complexe, puisqu'effectivement, il y a des impératifs sanitaires, comme on vient de l'entendre. Il y a des impératifs d'apprentissage pour les élèves. On ne peut pas laisser et abandonner nos élèves, nos étudiants, et évidemment, ils ont envie d'apprendre. Les enseignants ont envie de revoir leurs élèves, les élèves ont envie de revoir leurs enseignants et leurs camarades. Donc, il y a sans doute une nécessité de réouvrir les écoles. Et puis, on voit bien que dans cette réouverture, il y a aussi sans doute des implications qui sont des implications politiques et des implications économiques parce que, effectivement, si les enfants sont à la maison, les parents ne peuvent pas travailler et l'économie tourne au ralenti. C'est donc sur cette question de la réouverture des établissements que nous allons maintenant écouter une table ronde et nous allons accueillir 4 personnes. Tout d'abord, Andrew Jack, qui est journaliste au Financial Times et qui va être le modérateur de cette table ronde, et avec 3 intervenants syndicalistes, Marie Boustut, qui devrait nous rejoindre, qui vient du Royaume-Uni, Randy Weingarten, qui vient des États-Unis, et Stéphane Handel, qui, lui, est syndicaliste en Norvège. Je leur laisse donc la parole.
Hello, merci bien. So thanks very much indeed, everybody. Welcome to our panel, where we're talking to a number of union leaders about these challenges of schooling in the era of COVID. My name is Andrew Jack from the FT, and so we have, as you heard, Mary Bousted, the Joint Secretary General of the National Education Union in the UK, Randy Weingarten, the President of the American Federation of Teachers, and Stefan Handal, the President of the Union of Education in Norway. So we're going to talk about some themes between us over the next 40 minutes or so, but I'd also encourage people to pose any reflections, comments, or questions in the comment stream, so we can try to incorporate some of those, your issues and reflections and thoughts as we go on during our discussion. But let me begin maybe with Mary. Hello there, Mary.
Hello. Hi, Andy.
Let's see. I want to do a first round, excuse me, of people talking about surprises. Tell us a little bit from your perspective. So schools reopening in the autumn in the UK. What were the 2 most surprising things for you?
I think, well, I don't know why I was surprised about this, but I think that the number of teachers who have got in touch with me and said how pleased they were to be back at school, and how delighted they were to see their students again. That was really heartening and warming. I mean, you know that teachers have a high moral and ethical purpose. So that was really fantastic to see that and to hear about that. I think that teachers have got more and more worried in the UK as the school closures continued about the well-being of their students, and more worried also about particularly disadvantaged students and their access to the means to carry on their learning. So they were really pleased about that. I was also surprised for a less good reason, which is I was surprised at how poorly the English government has got its test, track, trace and isolate system in place, which is causing increasing problems for schools. Teachers who can't get tests, students who can't get tests, and that's starting to result in lower school attendance. And it is surprising that that has been so consistently poor throughout the pandemic in the UK.
And Randy, actually, that I'll come back to you in a second in broader surprises for you, but I mean, that's certainly something one's seen a lot across different states in the US as well. I mean, what's your sense of the level of robustness and confidence in testing and tracking amongst teachers?
In the US?
Yeah.
So I think you just saw just how abysmal it is by what has happened in the last few days, when the President of the United States was in 4 states maskless, and most of the participants in those states, the health departments don't even know or haven't even been contacted by their tracers. And this is the President of the United States who now has COVID. And so what we're seeing is in the US, you just basically have a complete patchwork, piecemeal approach to tackling the virus that was done through the lens nationally of downplaying and denying. So there are some states like New York State, which is where I live, where both the governor and the mayor, who are, you know, the ones that have basically been responsible for the health issues, the mayor in the city of New York, the governor of the state, who really did erect and stand up lots and lots of testing. So, and there is now in New York City, in Boston, in New Mexico, there's now a very robust randomized test process that gets maintained in order to keep schools open. They're trying to do the same in terms of LA, but it's hard to put it together. So I would just say, Andrew, that the what you're seeing in the United States is that some of us pushed very hard for the panoply of safety safeguards. And in places where we had density or leverage or power, we were able to get them in. There's lots of parents who have opted out of in-person learning, so that there's about 75 of the 100 largest districts that are still on remote. Some are gradually starting. In places that are very densely occupied and in many of the suburbs, you basically have half the kids doing in person, and in the places that are open, and in places where there's been denials, you have lots of hiding about the data. Thankfully, we know that kids get COVID, but they are more resistant to serious illness, which has been very helpful. But so has the fact that in so many places, we have now gotten at least mask and physical distancing and washing of hands. But the thing I can just undermine as much as I possibly can is the failure of our federal government to either create trust, as I've learned from Stefan how important that was from Norway, and the failure to have either the resources, and the failure to have any transparency or any national data. So we're going to have to wait till we have a new president, God willing, in order to actually have any kind of national approach to this, particularly as things are surging again.
Thanks, and I'll come back to you perhaps on other surprises. But since we're on this theme, Stefan, tell us a little bit. It's true that we often hear the Scandinavian model is a much more consensual one. You've taken a kind of more coordinated approach, it seems, with wide buy-in from society. I mean, how does it feel on the ground from your perspective? Is, for example, track and trace and that level of support from the state much more robust, do you think? And has that influenced the response of the school system and of teachers?
Well, I think what Randy just said just reminds us, everybody, about the importance of trust in society. And I think what has been actually surprising, but also comforting, is to note that the trust has been very important in Norway, both in closing down the schools, but also in reopening them. And it's been quite essential for us to build on this trust. And we see that it's very easy to bring all parties together around the same table to have a great dialogue on how to do it in a properly manner. And that's what we are trying to do, and I think that's the way forward as well. I think I was quite surprised at how complicated it was to reopen the schools. It was actually more complicated than closing them down. And I think what also surprised me is how important the communication between health authorities and the education authorities were, and how difficult it was for the health authorities to recognize all the practicalities that is needed to be put in place before you can reopen schools. Going forward now, looking at testing and tracking, I think the system in Norway is very well put in place. There is not a separate system for schools or teachers, but all people who get COVID-19 is of course tested, and they are trying to track them as good as they can.
And study, so I mean, it's a complex picture, but a pretty harmonious one. Just tell us, Stefan, I mean, are there any points of tension perhaps between the teachers and government and its different outlets and branches in this whole process?
Absolutely. There's a lot of uncertainty among our members. And of course, teachers are overworked like crazy. There's a lack of teachers in Norway. There is also a lack of resources. And so this method of collaborating does not mean that everything is okay, and we use just about as much energy trying to to make politicians understand that they need to put the resources in place. They need to attract young people to the teaching profession. So there's a lot of things that we are critical about. But the thing is that we have a system where this critique is handled in an orderly fashion, and where we can have a great dialogue around the same table. And those two things can happen at the same time in Norway, and it's very important.
So, Mary, we've heard those two different geographical contrasting perspectives and cultures. You've already been critical. Obviously, you set these parameters that really the government in the UK failed to achieve in terms of a robust track and trace system. I mean, all that said, in the absence of that, in hindsight, could anything have been done differently from the teacher side? Do you think there are ways to cope with a return to relative normality, even in the absence of that sort of robust public health system being put in place?
Well, I think that's difficult, and I think that's going to cause more problems as we go along. We're already seeing that school attendance is falling, and we're asking the government, where is the school attendance falling the most? And we suspect it's going to be in the deprived areas where the viral cases are very high, and where there's already significant restrictions on people's movement and how many people can have in their home, etc., etc. Now, we know that the government has said that schools should remain open and they should be the last public institution to close, and we agree with that. We think that schools should remain open, but you can't. What I think is clear is you can't just simply say we want this to happen, we have a will to make it happen, we demand that it happens, it will happen, and then expect it to happen without putting the means in place to enact the will. And that's what the government has done repeatedly during this crisis. So I don't know how widespread it is known, but this summer there was a massive scandal, really, about the qualifications, the awarding of qualifications at 16 and 18 in the UK. The government relied on, the governments throughout the four nations relied on an algorithm to award exam grades, which had virtually which in most cases had nothing to do with the actual standard of work achieved by the students, and that was arrived at because exams had to be cancelled. And the problems with that approach were building up, and the government just said, no, we've got a perfect system, we've got the best system, it's robust, it's reliable, it will give valid results, until it didn't. And then they had to go back to unmoderated centre grades, which was not an outcome that anybody would have wanted. And there's a danger for that sort of approach to carry on being repeated. So what Stefan said about workload exploding, about schools having to implement significantly more rigorous cleaning procedures, but having no extra cleaners and having no extra money for cleaning. We're already seeing that schools are coming to the end of their budgets for extra staffing and getting no more money from the government, even when significant numbers of teachers have to isolate and they're looking around to get extra teachers. So in June, we put a proposal to the government on the 10th of June, talking about how you get extra teachers, how you need to prepare for remote learning and blended learning, how you need to increase the size of schools so that there is less pressure on school buildings. In the UK, we have some of the most crowded school buildings in the world, in the developed world, 97% occupancy of school buildings. And we put forward a whole range of proposals which were really helpful, which are, if we want to get schools and colleges up and running again, these are things you need to do. You need to get more teachers, you need to get more space, and you need to prepare for, as the, when we come back, there will be students who have to isolate at home. So you need to prepare for remote and blended learning. And the approach the government has taken with that has not been helpful. Indeed, last week, they issued it into law that the government took itself a directive that schools had to provide remote learning, which was as good as school learning for students who couldn't be in school. But really, the resources to do that are completely inadequate. If you're going to do this properly, if you're going to say that education is the most important thing, then you have to invest in it properly and you have to plan for it properly. You can't just will without providing the means to achieve the will.
Randy, do you want to come in first, and then I'll go to Stefan?
Yeah,
Please.
I mean, so, Cynthia Nixon wrote an op-ed. She's an actress, and she wrote an op-ed for the New York Times a few weeks ago, which kind of showed how low on the priority scale schools are. Big on rhetoric, very little in terms of the wherewithal to get things done. And what she said was, and that's why I want to raise it, is that in her 2 phone calls, she contrasted 2 phone calls. One, in terms of the set that she's on, in terms of dealing with how frequently they're doing testing, how much they have, all the protocols are embedded. So they don't even pit the protocols versus what you need to do in terms of the conditions of acting. All of them were embedded, the plexiglass, the mask, the cleaning, as Mary just said, the physical distancing, all those protocols were in place before any of the actors or actresses walked onto the set, versus all the things that Mary just said and that Stefan said, the lack of the resources, even when you don't have high community spread, and the fact what Stefan said, which is really important, which is this is the hardest thing that teachers have had to do in my lifetime, because it is a pandemic combined with a recession, combined with a learning loss, combined with a huge level of anxiety for kids and lots of isolation. So you have to have the safety safeguards, and you have to have real resources to wellness, real resources to equity. And then you have to start thinking about how do you teach, and teaching remotely is really different than teaching in person. And so teachers still have to figure all of this out by themselves these days. And in a place like Norway, there's at least a real collaboration and a trust. In a place like the UK or the United States, we're really doing it on our own. That creates even more agita. So it's really, really hard, and we don't have the resources and we don't have the guidance. The only guidance that our Secretary of Education put out, other than trying to take $1 billion of money that was directed to poor kids. And by the way, 16 million of our kids still don't have equipment for remote learning, like connectivity or the machine, 16 of 51 million. But the only guidance she put out this year was, by the way, the standardized tests will continue in April. That shows you just the lack of priorities. And the only thing she's concerned about is how do you have test scores that show that public schools are not working so well, so that she can move people to private schools.
Stefan.
So it seems like the picture is the same everywhere. It's really hard to be a teacher these days, and there's not enough resources to do the work that we need to do. I just want to give an example of how we deal with this in Norway, because tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, all the unions who operate in the local municipalities, representatives of all those unions, together with the Organization for Local Municipalities in Norway, are meeting with 4 ministers of the government to discuss how we are going to be able to make sure that kids can stay in schools, patients can go to the hospitals, all those things, that we can get through this pandemic. And I think this is a very important way of working. I'm not saying that everything is great in Norway, but at least we have a possibility to have dialogue with the politicians and to try to make the best of things. And I just want to point out one important thing that has been a very important distinction for the union in Norway, and that is to try not to be experts on COVID-19, but to be experts on how we can make schools, kindergartens, universities operate under those rules that the health authorities put in place. And I think it's really hard to keep the distinction between COVID-19 experts and experts on education. I think it's been very, very hard to take that role, but I think it's really important. But it is essential. that everyone trusts each other if you're going to keep those roles intact. And I would not love to be in Randy Weingarten's shoes these days, with a president who obviously don't care about anything else but himself, and who is not concerned with building trust to anybody. It seems like the most horrible situation to be a teacher.
So, Mary, we've talked about the, should we say, the failures and the tensions between the teaching body and government. But what about with parents? I mean, Randy touched on this, and the US is perhaps a more extreme case of pretty divided opinion amongst individual citizens as well, isn't it? So what are you seeing, and how are you trying to mediate where there may be parents who have different views on whether their kids should be going back or how to interact with the schools and the unions?
Yeah, and I must admit that during May and June, I had a pretty torrid time professionally, and found myself in the wholly unexpected position of being in the banner headlines of the right-wing press on repeated occasions. So that's less than pleasant. You barely recognise yourself, and then when you look at the comments underpinning the web version, you just really think, who is this horrible woman? Could it be me? And you're positioned as being feckless and irresponsible and not caring for children's education. And indeed, we were blamed for closing the schools in March and keeping them closed in July. So that was quite interesting, and you have to have broad shoulders. The very interesting thing, actually, though, the reality of the situation is that the vast majority of parents recognise how difficult it is and how challenging it is to be a teacher, the work that schools do and the work that teachers do. And I think what came through most clearly of all is that schools are far more than academic hothouses. Of course, children and young people are in schools and colleges to learn. Of course they are. And that's the centre of the school's work. But when schools aren't open, it became quickly apparent how essential they are for keeping children fed, for looking after their welfare, for picking up on safeguarding issues, for supporting parents in parenting their children as best that they can. How actually schools are at the centre. They are the most. We've got 23,000 schools in England and Wales, and schools are at the centre of the community, and they are particularly at the centre of deprived communities, where they do so much more than simply, although that's very important, it's the core of their work, educating pupils. And that became increasingly recognised and respected. The complex and challenging work that leaders and teachers and education, welfare and support staff do. And when schools are open, how that drives a dent in those communities.
So Randy, same question to you. Obviously, the US has an incredibly localized approach to governance management funding, doesn't it, of schools? Have you found yourself in the middle a little bit in terms of different views of different parents and communities as well?
Yes and no. I think what happened was so we did a bunch of polling of parents and educators with several groups that represent parents, NAACP, LULAC, AROS, at the end of August, beginning of September, and found, frankly, a lot of consistency and universality in terms of what parents and teachers thought. But I think what happened was in July, the president decided that he needed, or his campaign decided that they needed another way of trying to be divisive and chaotic. So like right after the July 4th Independence Day, he comes out with a tweet that says, all schools should reopen, in all caps. Again, showing the kind of not even understanding what it would take to do that, but trying to create that divisiveness and believing, I think, that either the chaos, sorry about my dogs, but either the chaos would be helpful to him because he thrives on chaos, or that this was a way of reopening the economy, and that's what he was driving at, and that kids' lives and teachers' lives were dispensable. And this was around the same time as the last summer spike happened in the United States. We're having another spike now, but the last summer spike happened. So we decided, because we are localized, Andrew, as you said, and different places that you see different reactions. But what we saw in the polling is this. 3 conclusions. Number one, parents and educators thought safety should be first, overwhelmingly. And you had 68% of parents, including 88% of Black and brown parents. Number two, that they thought that schools had reopened too quickly. And number three, and this was actually the most important finding to me, which is 71% of parents and 79% of educators said, if we could get the safety standards intact, including the mask and the physical distancing, they wanted to be back doing in-person learning because they understand that in-person learning, with all of the issues, is so much better for kids right now. So what we've seen is that that in individual situations, like a special needs child who has not been able to use a video screen like we're doing right now, really, really needs that in-person learning. And you see a parent being, oh my God, I need to get my kid into school. And, or, you know, parents who don't have childcare and they must, they're essential workers, or they're, you know, or they're not going to have any opportunity to work other than having school. So you see these kind of situations of extremis, and we need to be mindful of that. But by and large, parents and educators are in the same place.
So Stefan, I mean, let's just talk about this from the personal level. This is World Teachers' Day after all. So let's hear a little bit about what your sense is from your individual members, from teachers. I mean, how are they coping with this huge level of disruption and innovating as far as they can to adapt?
First of all, they're extremely tired. And I think we're now seeing that more kids are staying home because they have symptoms. More teachers are staying because they have symptoms and they can't go to work. And this is putting a lot of pressure on the teaching profession. And I'm really worried about how we're going to get through this. And I think that's the concern looking forward. Looking at what's happened is that I think a lot of teachers are a bit proud of what they've been through, and I think they also are really proud of what they were able to do digitally, online, with using ICT. And I think it's also been a lesson for a lot of parents, the ability we had to start over, to think new, to be innovative, and really use the technology. And I think a lot of parents have also seen the importance of education from different perspectives than they usually do. They've seen it like both Mary and Randy have touched on, the social perspective, the importance for themselves to go to work, the importance of meeting people face to face. And I think what's happened must be a blow in the face for everybody who thought that we could just digitalize everything. We've proven that it's possible to do that, but it has great downsides. And that's why we can't do it the way that some people have introduced we should do it. And the other thing is that this period has shown us how important education is, not to score well on tests, but to build individuals and to build communities. And those are huge lessons that I think teachers feel really proud about being a part of. But I have to end on this because I am really concerned about how we're going to get through this marathon. It's been like we've been starting on a 100-meter race again and again and again, and it's turned out to be a marathon, which is really, really hard on teachers.
Mary, we're almost out of time. Very briefly, though, the same message. Actually, let me just change the message slightly. What would you say would be the one learning, perhaps throwing things forward for you as a union for the next few months?
I think we've got 50,000 new members since March, and one of the things we've learned as a union is how to communicate with them. So on the 18th of May, we had a Zoom meeting with 20,000 members on that. We have used Zoom, and that's spread throughout the union to the local areas, the local districts. And the other thing is the incredible power of WhatsApp. So now we have groups of reps, school reps, representatives in districts who are, facing the same issues, facing the same problems, and saying, what did you do about it? And how did you speak to the school leader? And what's reasonable in your school? So what's actually happened is, in many, many areas, teachers, rather than relying always, on going to the union for guidance, they're starting to do it for themselves. And these are largely women, largely young women, who are getting a voice and becoming empowered in the workplace. And I think that's really exciting.
And Randy, a final word from you. Any learnings, reflections going forwards to colleagues?
Well, look, there's a lot of learnings, and I hope we take them. First off, I pray that everyone is safe and wearing a mask. Number two, that people need voice and people need agency, whether it's parents, whether it's educators, whether it's citizens. And what I think Mary just said, and people need trust, as Stefan has said, with government. What Mary just said is we're seeing tremendous engagement with our membership. We have these town halls, we do a lot of these things, but our fighting from April about reopening better than we closed was really important, and the members and the leaders really appreciated that work. But the last thing I'll say, this is World Teacher Day, and it is extraordinary what teachers do all across the country, all across the world. Think about how much has been thrown at us. Think about what a marathon this is. Think about how we knew from the beginning remote doesn't work very well as a substitute, and I think now the world knows. But everything that gets thrown at us, we are doing, and that's because of how Herculean, how caring, how resilient, how resourceful, how ingenious teachers are across the world. And so I just want to end, Andrew, by saying thank you to you, thank you to Stefan and Mary, and thank you to all of the teachers and the paraprofessionals around the world who are trying to make a difference in the lives of children in this pandemic.
Randy, Stefan, Mary, thank you very much. And thanks all you teachers for your great work. Great to be in touch. Happy Teachers Day.
Un grand merci à vous quatre pour avoir participé à ce débat. Merci à Andrew pour l'avoir mené. Merci à Randy, à Stéphane et à Marie. Et on a pu voir qu'à travers la diversité des situations, il y a un certain nombre de points communs qui apparaissent. Et ce qui est assez frappant, c'est que sans doute cette crise sanitaire montre, mais Randy vient de le dire à la fin de son intervention, cette crise sanitaire fait apparaître aussi une crise politique mondiale finalement. Et on voit bien que faire de la politique, qui est une politique descendante, sans tenir compte de la parole, au fond, des citoyens, des syndicats, est aujourd'hui une façon de faire de la politique qui ne fonctionne pas et qui, en période de crise, pose un certain nombre de questionnements et sur laquelle il faut évidemment agir. Un grand merci vraiment pour ces apports qui ont été les vôtres. Je vous propose maintenant d'écouter Koen Timmers. Koen Timmers est un éducateur belge. Il a été finaliste du Global Teacher Prize en 2017 et en 2018. Il va avoir une première expression où il va être seul. Et puis, dans la foulée, nous écouterons un échange, une interview entre Koen Timmers et puis quelqu'un qu'on connaît bien, qui est Jane Goodall, qui est, vous le savez, la célèbre primatologue et anthropologiste que nous connaissons tous.
Hi, my name is Koen Timmers, and we are facing some global issues worldwide. Climate crisis, environmental sustainability, etc. And I believe that education plays an essential role not only to give a better understanding to students, but even to allow them to solve problems and take action. The thing is that students are able to do more than memorizing a definition about climate change. They have the potential to find solutions and even take action. And during the past 3 years, we launched a climate action project, which unites more than 1 million teachers and students. We ask our students across 120 different countries to explore, to brainstorm, to discuss, create, share findings and solutions at one website, allowing them to learn both synchronous and asynchronous from their peers in every corner of the world in a very authentic way. By inviting parents to the classroom, they have been able to bring change bottom up. By developing inventions, they have been able to bring change in their schools and communities as well. Like in Nigeria, students created their own biomass plants, and in the US, the students developed a solar suitcase. By reaching out to governments, they have been able to bring substantial change top-down in different nations. Like in Ireland, students were invited by the Minister of Environment, and they have been able to bring national change with the Green Dot movement, and even received a letter from their president. In Malawi, the students planted 60 million trees, supported by their president as well. Students in Colombia created eco-friendly cars in cardboard, Canadian students 3D printed coral reefs, and Argentinian students developed their own recipes for bioplastics. These activities gave students deeper understanding of some global issues, allowing them to be creative, think critically, and all of those practices led to a change of the students' mindset and the society's behavior. The project was covered by national media in 40 different countries, was endorsed by the Dalai Lama, Jane Goodall, Princess Esmeralda, Kumi Naido, and President Higgins. We work with 50 partners in the same amount of countries and 50 ministries of education to make sure that we reach as many teachers and students globally. Our goals: 1, we aim to plant 1 billion trees by 2030. This year we launched our initiative Planted for the second time, and last year the students planted 1.2 million trees during 2 single weeks. This year we already know that there will be planted 1 million bamboo seedlings in the Philippines during 1 single day. 2, our second initiative is In the Air. We will bring 100 microbit kits with sensors to 100 schools in 100 different countries. These will allow students to measure air quality and to make sure that the data will be submitted to a global platform accessible by everybody, and students will be able to find solutions for this. 3, we also strive for a compulsory climate and environmental education, and at this moment only Italy is doing this, so we can do way better than that. In case you are a Minister of Education, please consider supporting our project by sending a letter of support or even a video message. And any teachers attending this presentation, well, make sure to sign up at our website because the project is free. You will be sent guidelines, a curriculum which we developed with WWF International. We will be sending you guidelines. The website allows you to connect with teachers from across the world, so you are able to interact with them, to share best practices, but also concerns. You will be personally guided by our facilitators in 10 different languages, and that will be in October for 6 weeks. Your students will even be able to send their messages to Mars thanks to our collaboration with NASA. Due to COVID-19, we decided to modify our program. You decide how much time you are able to spend on this project, and your students will even be able to participate at home, as we have activities which require very little amount of resources, like creating a vertical garden from trash, creating bioplastics with milk and vinegar, etc. Climate and ecological crisis demand a systematic change. No small shifts in the right direction. So please join our project, because that is exactly what we are going to do. Thank you.
Hello, this is Koen Timmers. I'm based in Belgium, and my organization TAG has been launching the Climate Action Project during the past week. And what we try to do is unite as many teachers and students globally, and trying to make sure that they are able to share findings, but also solutions and actions with each other at one central point, at the one website. And that brings us to our subject today, which is climate education. And I'm absolutely delighted we will be interviewing Dr. Jane Goodall. So Jane, hi. What would be your advice for the teachers?
Well, I think my advice to teachers is, be flexible. And right now we're going through pretty dark times. And I think most students, at least when they're, older than about 10, they're going to want to talk about what's happening. And so right now is a very crucial time when we need good teachers to be able to give young people encouragement and confidence. And of course, it's also a time when virtual learning and subjects that can be shared over the internet becomes more and more important. And probably that in itself will be useful long after this epidemic, because it will help teaching in those places where children don't get opportunities for good schooling.
Yeah. What are some simple things students and even teachers can do to take action for climate?
Well, one of the important things is trying to find ways to heal some of the harm we've inflicted and to slow down climate change, because, to some extent, we brought it on ourselves. Just like the pandemic, we have utterly disrespected nature and disrespected animals. And that disrespect has led to the COVID-19, a zoonotic disease. We've created environments where it's relatively easy for a pathogen like a virus, like COVID-19, to jump from an animal to a person, like the wildlife meat markets where animals from all over are sold for food, for pets, for medicine, and the bushmeat markets in Africa, and the international pet trade, and also our factory farms where animals are kept in unhygienic, cruel conditions. And then we will come through this pandemic, and then we're just right up against the crisis which is ongoing now all through the pandemic, which is the climate crisis. And again, it's our disrespect of nature, this absurd feeling that we can continue to have unlimited global economic development on a planet with finite natural resources. And we're already using those up faster in some places than nature can replenish them. So what can people do? Well, there's a big move now for planting trees, because trees are absorbing CO2 from the atmosphere. Protecting forests and existing trees is right now very, very important, because it's going to take the trees we plant time to get big enough to do their job. But it's important to start now. And cleaning up the ocean, that's another thing. People can fight the use of single-use plastic and other things that pollute the ocean, and have beach cleanups if there's a beach, but river cleanups is just as important, because the river swishes everything down. And, the great thing about teaching or being with or talking to the university students, the high school students, they have so many ideas as to what they can do. It's unbelievable. If children understand the problem and you empower them to take action, to talk, you listen to them, they come up with fantastic ideas themselves. And that's something, again, for teachers to set up situations where you can talk to and listen to and encourage the young people to share their ideas.
Yeah. So we all know you as a world-renowned primatologist, but you're so much more than that. You also created Roots and Shoots, which we are really happy and delighted we've been able to work with you with the innovation labs in Pugu and Kigoma. But would you mind elaborating a little bit on Roots and Shoots' mission and vision?
You'd have a hard job to stop me doing that, because Roots and Shoots was literally my passion. Okay. And it began in 1991 with 12 high school students who were concerned about the dynamiting of coral reefs, of illegal dynamite fishing, which was destroying the coral reefs. Why weren't the government prosecuting poachers killing animals in the national park? Why was nobody doing more for the homeless children who were sniffing glue on the streets? All of these different things. And so I told them to go and get their friends who had similar concerns. And we had a meeting, and out of that meeting, Roots and Shoots was born. Main message: each one of us makes some impact on the planet every single day, all of us. And some of us can really make ethical choices about what we buy. Where did it come from? How was it made? Did it harm the environment? Is it cheap because of child slave labor or inequitable wages in some other country? Was it cruel to animals? We can ask those questions. People living in abject poverty simply have to do whatever they can to stay alive. And so solving poverty is tremendously important. We got that right from the start. And of course, in Tanzania, there's a lot of abject poverty. And then with Roots and Shoots, we decided from the beginning, because everything is interconnected, that each group would choose between them. They would choose, unless they were very small, then they need guidance. But one project to help people, one project to help animals, one project to help the environment, or one big project that covers all three. And it's just been amazing. That little group of 12 high school students has now turned into I call it a movement that's in more than 65, it's in more than 65 countries, and it's growing all the time. And we've got hundreds and thousands of young people from kindergarten through university making change every day. And we've also got what I call the alumni, all those who've been through the program in school or university, and somehow they retain the values that they acquired during their time with the Roots and Shoots. And by the way, Roots and Shoots, think of a big, beautiful tree, probably began as a little seed. You could have picked it up then and it would have seemed small and insignificant. But those little roots to reach the water can work through rocks and eventually push them aside. And that little shoot to reach the sunlight can work through cracks in a brick wall and eventually knock it down. So we see the rocks and the walls as all the problems we humans have inflicted on the planet. And it's a message of hope. Hundreds and thousands of young people together can solve these problems, but they need guidance, especially when they're young.
So, do you think that education, formal education, has to change, and in what way? And maybe is there a message to the ministers of education globally?
I think people, particularly teachers, and particularly in some countries, are understanding that there really is a need for change. And one of the changes which I always push for is spending more time outside, spending more time in nature. Once we realized that the pandemic was caused by disrespect of nature to some extent, destroying the environment, pushing animals in closer contact with people. And so once we realized that, then children need to learn to respect and understand nature. And looking at a book is all very well, but especially for small children, being out there, see their eyes light up when they discover something for themselves. It makes all the difference in the world. And I think, your innovation labs is encouraging the young people to go out into the forest, which is near them in Tanzania, and find out for themselves. And it's really changing them. And if we don't have young people today grow up to be good stewards of the planet, we may as well all give up.
Yeah. So students who will entering school right now, they will leave it in 15 years. What would be your hope for them, for those kids?
Well, I'm hoping, you know, we do have some roots and shoots schools where the ethic of roots and shoots is built into every single part of the curriculum. And I can't expect that that's going to happen everywhere, but it's maybe something like it, so that environmental education will be built into and woven into the ethic of the schools. And so young people going into school now, honestly, it's going to depend on where they go, because there are some countries or parts of a country where teachers simply, they don't have the imagination, they haven't had the training, they just go by the book, and kids get bored. They totally get bored. So it's teacher workshops. We do a lot of that, and working with teachers and inspiring teachers, because if you're not inspired, how do you inspire your students? So what do I hope for the children going into school now? That if they don't have inspiring teachers, they can go online and find inspiring teachers there. And that's what I hope. But I'd like to know, Koen, what do you feel about this?
When there was Corona at the very beginning, I felt like this is going to decrease the gap between people. But now it more feels like it is increasing the gap. And I'm a bit concerned about how all of this is I felt that climate was changing because of COVID. But I also see that people sometimes have other priorities. And I really hope that we will find a way to bring everybody closer together. Because I also know that you travel a lot of days a year, like 300. And you need a lot of, yeah, no, isn't that?
300, it was before lockdown, yes.
Yeah. So I really wonder how this affects your life and how you still, because I know that many teachers struggle with teaching online. And I would love to know, Jane, how this affects you, how you still would love to inspire without able to travel to those people.
Well, you know, when I was first kind of, I say, grounded here, luckily I was here. I was nearly grounded in Abu Dhabi. Fortunately, I'm here with all my things. And first I was frustrated and angry. And then I thought, well, that's not helping anybody. So I and a small team got to work to create a virtual Jane. And that virtual Jane is on Zooms and webinars and Skypes, giving out video messages, opening conferences, making speeches, doing interviews, writing articles, and of course, millions and millions of emails. And the hardest thing for me has been, you know, giving a talk in an auditorium with thousands of people. There's an excitement in the air, an energy. Now I've got to learn, have had to learn to give a talk that will inspire, looking at that stupid little green spot on the top of a laptop, which is a camera lens, and trying to imagine all the people listening. And apparently it's working. People have said, yeah, we were inspired, it's okay. But gosh, it's not easy at all. But anyway, that's how I'm spending my time. And I don't have any spare time at all, except at lunchtime, I take the dog for a walk. I sit under my favorite tree when I was a child, and I call my little friend who's a robin, and the robin comes every day and I sing to the robin, and sometimes the robin sings back to me.
That's wonderful. So thank you so much for this, Dr. Jane Goodall. Do you have some final words for our audience?
Well, I think the most important words I've already said, but I will say them again. And that's that every single one of us matters and has a role to play. Some people don't yet know their role. What we do every day does make a difference. Just me picking up a plastic bag or 10 in a day wouldn't make any difference, but we now know it's happening everywhere. And so this saying, think globally, act locally, is the wrong way round. Because honestly today, if you think globally, you get depressed, you can't help it. But if you say, well, what can I do here and now? Yeah, I can clean a stream, I can pick up trash, I can recycle, I can raise money to help refugees in a far off country. It's all kinds of things that people can do. And so I think this message that what you do actually does matter is a very, very important thing to think about every single day, because it's people feeling helpless and hopeless that leads to apathy, and apathy will be the end of all of us.
Thank you so much.
Well, what an inspiring interview with Jane Goodall there. Thank you so much, Jane. Talking about the need for change and to get children outside and all of those kinds of interesting ideas. So now we're coming to the OECD for a view about what they think about teachers and our teacher unions. We're delighted to be joined by Andrea Schleicher, who is, of course, the Director for Education and Skills at the OECD, and also by Andrea Zafirikou, who was the winner of the Global Teacher Prize in 2018. Now, how they're going to manage to do all of this in 15 minutes, I have no idea, but I will cut them off if they overrun. So off you go.
Hello everyone, and Andreas, what a pleasure once again to be sharing this platform for you, and welcome to World Teachers Day. How are you?
Very well, and congratulations to World Teachers Day. It's just a fantastic and important event to celebrate the work of teachers.
Yeah, thank you very much. Now, as you heard, we haven't got long, and I've got so many questions to ask you. So I'm going to crack on if that's okay. So firstly, now correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that your higher education background was in physics, and your first job was with Philips Medical Systems. So when did you become interested in education and in teachers in particular?
Well, actually, after my first job, I did my civil service in a school for disadvantaged children, and that really inspired me. And I learned, to work with children, and I saw that many of the children who were there solely because they had grown up in the wrong context. And I also saw how teachers can make such a difference. And I really think from that day onward, I've changed my career, and I have never regretted it.
Oh, wow, that's so inspiring. And I've had the pleasure of reading your recent book, World Class, and you wrote the most wonderful dedication to all the teachers, where you said they dedicate their lives often in difficult conditions and rarely with the appreciation they deserve to helping the next generation realize their dreams and shape our future. Why do you think teachers are so important for young people's learning?
Well, I think learning is never a transactional phenomenon. It's always a relational and a social phenomenon. We too easily forget that. And the one thing that, for example, young people will remember 10 years from now from this pandemic is the teacher who reached out to them, who understood their difficulties, who understood their dreams and passions, and who helped young people to realize those dreams. Now, education is not about teaching young people something. It's about helping them develop a reliable compass and the tools to navigate through this world that is increasingly complicated, increasingly volatile, ambiguous. Now, success is about, building curiosity, opening minds. It's about building compassion, opening hearts. And it's about, courage, being able to mobilize our cognitive, social, and emotional capabilities. And I also think these are the best weapons that we have against the biggest threats in our times. If you think about, ignorance, the closed mind, or, hate, the closed heart, or fear, the enemy of agency. And when you think about this, it all comes down to people. We learn those things from and with people. That's why teachers are so crucial for education.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. And just going back to your book again, in your dedication, you said that teachers rarely get the appreciation they deserve. And again, I agree with you, but why do you think that this is the case?
Well, I guess it depends. Parents typically appreciate the teachers of their child. I don't think there is so much debate about this, but when it comes to the broader education system, we are often pushed to see the defaults and the deficiencies of those. In a way, education systems are good to keep students inside and the rest of the world outside. So the outside world sees education through the media that are very, very quick to point out the little flaws and faults. And I think that's why if you ask people, they like the teacher of their child, they talk, poorly about the education system or even the teaching profession. And I think that's the dilemma that we have to solve by being a more open profession, by creating better ways for parents to be part of this. And actually, in this way, I think the pandemic has served a great purpose. It brought parents and teachers closer together. If you think about the last 10, 15 years, the biggest threat to education has been in a growing trend towards commodification. In a way, students became consumers, parents became clients, and teachers became service providers. It has created that distance, actually, that has made education that has worked against the agency. And I think we need to overcome this. Education only works as a whole of society enterprise. And in the way, the pandemic has strengthened that. And I do think there is now much greater appreciation for the work of teachers than before. Whether we can keep it, we don't know.
Yeah, no, I can echo that. I think I've become much more closer with many of the parents of the students I teach. Now, moving on, I'd like to ask you about PISA. So one of your first jobs at the OECD was to create the Programme for International Student Assessment. And we know that many policymakers believe it is indispensable. But do you think it's indispensable for classroom teachers?
Well, good question. Whether it's PISA or something else, I think teachers need a window to the world. I think that's crucially important. In a way, too many teachers work in total isolation in their classroom. And I do think PISA provides that perspective. It helps teachers to look upward to the next teachers, to the next school, to the next education system. If you think, for example, in your country, the exchange between, teachers in China and teachers in Britain, that was inspired by teachers looking at different kind of educational practice, learning from and with each other. I hope, we're going to see a greater sense of professional autonomy, but also stronger collaborative culture. And that, for me, is what PISA really can support.
Now, my next question is, most teachers belong to unions and professional associations. How important do you think unions are for teachers, especially in the pandemic? Do you think they should be more involved in education policy making?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you think about unions, often it's about industrial issues. But I do think unions need to get much more to the core of education policy. In fact, I believe where you do not involve teachers in the design of policies and teacher organizations, you cannot, expect them to help you implement those kinds of policies. And that's, I think, one of the tragedies that we have seen in education, that there are a lot of things that come from the outside towards teachers, towards schools, whether it's technology, whether it's pedagogy, whether it's a curriculum. And I do think we need greater ownership of educational practices by the profession. And, teachers cannot do that in isolation. They need to do that through professional organizations, through unions. So absolutely, I do think, and it's not about politics. It's really about the involvement in the policies. You would want to see the policies of education, the design of education systems really shaped by those who have the best expertise, and those are the people at the front line.
I mean, I couldn't agree with you more, especially in times like this where we do need to hear the voices from the teachers on the ground, and they will help indeed. Now, if we can just reflect on the COVID pandemic, it has fundamentally disrupted children's and young people's education. What do you think teachers need most in responding to this challenge?
Well, I think the pandemic has transformed student learning. It has transformed teaching. I think what you need most as a teacher is not just to be a good instructor, it's also to be a good coach, to be a good mentor, a good facilitator, a good evaluator. I think the pandemic has really highlighted that we need to take a much more holistic role to the responsibilities of teachers in teaching. And that also means changing work organizations. I mean, one of the trends that we have seen in the last decades is actually that teachers became more and more focused on the instructional process. Then you hire experts from other subjects. But again, I think we probably, teachers may want to teach less and work more on other things, and having more time with students outside the classroom setting. Know your subject, of course. Know how different students know that subject, but also know better your students as individuals. Now, that's what the pandemic has really highlighted, where you cannot reach out to every individual student. They're going to get lost. You're not going to get them back. So I think we have designed school systems, this very industrial approach we have to this, where often we, ask teachers to teach a very specific subject. I think that needs to give way to a much more holistic set of responsibilities. I hope that after this pandemic, teachers will get more space to actually relate to students and to act as, social workers and psychologists, and to bring together a much more broader range of responsibilities now.
No, I hope so, because there are so many amazing systems that have now been created from reflection of what we've undertaken in our schools. So fingers crossed, people are going to learn from them and not go back to how it was before. Here's my final question. There has been so much discussion about the future of schools due to the pandemic. We all know that schools are at the center of the communities and sometimes are felt as the heart of the community. What is their future? Will their role as a hub of the community be strengthened, or is their future more uncertain?
Well, I do hope that schools will become more a hub of our societies. In a way, our schools today are not just going to be the future of our economies, but also the future of our societies, who we are, how we relate to people, who are different from us. Now, I do think that is all clear, but I think it would, and I'm sure, we will find many teachers who share that vision. But we should not assume that there is an automaticity that will get us there. I think there are big challenges to that kind of vision. I mentioned the challenge of commodification in education, but there's also, many people after this pandemic who say, well, we've got less time, less resources, let's just focus on the basics. I think this idea that schools should assume a broader role in our societies rather than an even narrower role, and that education should not unravel, in a kind of range of services or technologies. I don't think that's a given. I think we have to work very, very hard on this. And I do think teacher organizations, teacher unions will have to be at the heart of this process.
I know, I couldn't agree with you more. Now, it's time to wrap up, but I just wanted to say a huge thank you, Andreas. Speaking to you is always inspiring. We can go on forever, but from the bottom of our heart, thank you very much for joining us to celebrate World Teachers' Day.
Thanks so much, Andrea. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
That was an amazing interview. Thank you very much, Andrea and Andreas. Now let's get some inside secrets from the USA, the Netherlands, and the UK on the union organizing experience in a live discussion. This panel is for all the unionists who feel that we know what we want, but wonder how to get there. Speakers will be discussing a new approach to organizing. In this session, we will discuss a union organizer, researcher, author of Shortcuts and the Collective Bargain, from the United States of America, Jane McAnally, National Learning Officer and Organizer of the National Education Union, from the United Kingdom, John Hegarty, and the Vice President of the AOB from the Netherlands, Jelmer Evers.
Thank you. My name is Jelmer Evers, and I'm really, really looking forward to this panel. I'm actually in the panel with two of my teachers, Jane McAlevey and John Hegarty. I've been following their course, and then tomorrow I'm going to listen to them again in International Strike School, but Jane is going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. So I just want to frame this discussion. I'm coming from the classroom, a teacher, now being vice president of the AOB, but still in the classroom. I've been looking for ways and being really frustrated, not sort of like getting my colleagues to come along, to organize, to become a member, to become active, and to organize in school and nationally. And I've been sort of like writing books and blogs and all these other things, and I think I've done some organizing. And as I looked outwards more and more to other unions, and for example, the NEU, but also what's happening in America, I figured, hey, we haven't really touched upon, so we know what a good education system looked like. We know what good teaching looked like, public education, trust, well-funded, all those kind of things. But we never really discuss how teachers are organizing. There's not a lot of research done on it. So when I read a book, I think it was 2-3 years ago, it was called No Shortcuts, Organizing for Power in a New Gilded Age. It was sort of like an eye-opener, an epiphany I had. I said, okay, this is sort of like the language, the tools, the research that we need. And it was a book by Jane McAlevey, a union organizer, coming from her practice, but also her research. So for me, it was really a life-changing book. It was something I've been looking for a long time. And the distinction between organizing and mobilizing, I think, is a really, really important one. So what I first wanted to ask is Jane sort of like to delve into that, and then go into sort of like the NEU's practice and get John into the conversation as well. So, but first of all, Jane, I'd like to ask you, so what is organizing? Can you explain the core concept to us?
Yeah, I can definitely explain it, and it's great to be here with you two today, Jelmer and John, and happy celebration of Teachers Day. I think for starters, we can pick up on where Jane Goodall left us just a few minutes ago. Actually, Jane Goodall herself actually said, apathy will be the end of us. So picking right up on her, I want to describe what organizing is as very distinct from what we think of as either activism or mobilizing. And for me, the best way to do that is actually to illustrate it with just a couple of slides. So I'm going to show some slides right now and see if I can quickly get the screen share to work very easily. There we go. So Jelmer mentioned that we're in Strike School together. I want to just show 3 or 4 slides here. The first is a picture of what looks like the Hong Kong umbrella protest. It's actually a 34,000 teacher strike in Los Angeles, California in January of 2019. This was a strike that, like the Chicago teacher strike, was sort of a defining moment in rebuilding power in teacher unionism in the United States. So how did the Los Angeles teachers have a 100% out strike over the central questions of how to make quality education real again in a city dominated by a lot of poor people? That were the central issues in the strike for the teachers. And one thing we talk a lot about that's going to get to what's organizing versus mobilizing in a handful of slides is something called structure tests. And I just want to throw these out there very quickly. The United Teachers of Los Angeles did a lot of what we call structure tests before they knew, it gets to the heart of organizing, before they knew that they were ready and able to call that strike. They did not wake up one day angry and upset and say, hey, let's just have a strike and walk off the job. In fact, they did, and I outlined in my newest book, A Collective Bargain, they did 12 what we call structure tests to know that their rank and file members, all 34,000, were united in solidarity and ready to walk off the job. And I want to just walk you through about 4 more slides and then leave screen share. Essentially what we're focusing on and what I teach and practice is how do you build a strong, effective worksite structure? In your case, this means how do you build a strong, effective, school site structure?
Jane, they asked you if you can just share your PowerPoint. You shared your main screen, and we saw like your whole screen also with the PowerPoint. Just justification.
I'll forget it. I'll just stop sharing then. That doesn't make any sense. So essentially, though, what I showed was a picture of 34,000 teachers walking out, and a beautiful picture of 34,000 teachers in Los Angeles walking out. And to get there, they had to practice a mechanism called structure tests. And the structure is the school site. And so what's different between organizing and mobilizing is that in mobilizing, which is what most teachers unions and most unions are doing, whether it's in Europe or around the world, or definitely in the United States, what it mostly means we're doing is we're talking to the teachers who want to talk to us. We're only making an effort. We call a meeting. If we're doing a good job, we call a meeting and people show up at a meeting. And it's never a very high percentage of the members who show up at a meeting, because who wants to go to an extra meeting? We generally run not very good meetings, and then we rely on who shows up, and we blame the people who don't show up, right? We literally say, well, we called a meeting, and if those teachers didn't show up to the meeting, too bad. That's actually the opposite of organizing. Organizing means we wake up in the morning and we have a plan, literally, to engage every single teacher into every single school every single week. And it means we're spending most of our time talking to the teachers who do not come to our meetings, are not in our social media feeds, and do not think they want to talk to us. That's the difference between a mobilizing approach or an advocacy approach, either one of them, and what we call a deep organizing approach. In the United States, the biggest strikes, which have led to the biggest improvements in standards for students and learning and teacher outcomes, has been the unions that are practicing the organizing approach, by which they make a plan every single week about how to engage every single teacher in every single school. That's what organizing is. And it's very different than the approach that most teacher unions rely on, which is let's talk to whoever shows up, right? So that's, I think, an opening salvo for what the distinction is between the two.
Yeah, yeah. So that's what was my experience coming and with the union, and also looking at other unions in Europe. So there's also a difference, because you talk about bargaining, for example, in hospitals for salaries. But in the Netherlands, for example, and I think in a lot of your other European countries, we have collective bargaining across like the whole country. But there are also a lot of workplace issues and a lot of things that we sort of like have a say on, but we're not really organized around. So what would you say to like ordinary teachers, like in the workplace, in the classroom, in the school? Does this also apply to them? Because that's what they always ask me.
Yeah, it totally applies to them. In fact, in the organizing model, the people who really do the work are actually rank and file teachers. So what we do, and what we're doing in the strike school right now that both Jelmer and John are participating in, what we do is we teach. So first, as educators, right? We're all educators on this call. So as educators, we teach rank and file teacher leaders what are the fundamentals of how you can engage 100% of the teachers school by school by school. Because, by the way, you're not going to successfully, even in the European model of sort of sectoral negotiations, in order to have maximum power to win at a table, whether it's a national table, because in the healthcare sector, by the way, in the United States, sadly, that is a private sector, I've done national bargaining, right? The equivalent of sectoral bargaining. When you're good enough in the US and you get enough power across a private sector, you can sort of force them into something like sectoral bargaining. But that only happens when we have the power, in our case, hospital by hospital, in your case, school by school in this case, right? So the ability to win strong national standards starts with what the actions are by every teacher at the most local level, school by school, whether that's to resolve school site issues or whether that's to bring more power to a national strike or a national discussion about educational policy. We have to be able to involve every single teacher in those discussions to make the concepts real that we're fighting for.
Exactly, and that's sort of like what I'm also trying to get going to John. So not third partying the union. The union is not a third party. It's sort of like it's your collective voice within the school and also within your country. So, John, we've had this talk before, and we're sort of like discussing where you are with the NEU at the moment, and you've been sort of like applying some of these lessons. So where are you at the moment with this? And maybe you can also say a little bit on your COVID response, because I was very impressed by that.
Sure. So I think that the real starting point is that where we are in terms of organising is we're 10 years into a project. This stuff doesn't happen overnight. You know, our organising strategy as the National Union has gone on for a long time, and it's involved building rep structures, building training, recruiting activists over years. But in terms of what we did during COVID, it did build on that organising legacy. And I suppose there were some digital tools that we used. We used a lot of Zoom meetings. At one point, we had 20,000 members on a Zoom call. We used Call Hub as a technology. With one of our aims was to phone every single one of our workplace reps. So that's 10,000 reps. We got through to nearly 4,000 and spoke to them. And one of the things that we were asking our reps to do was to meet with members, gather a petition as to people's opposition to wider reopening, and take that to the school management, which was a structure test. Because one of the things that was happening was reps were then coming back to us and saying, not everybody wants to sign it, what do I do? And we were then using those models that Jane's talked about. We were saying, okay, you're going to have to talk to the people who aren't on our side. This is how we do it. This is a structured organising conversation. What you're doing is a structure test. You're going to build power. And the result of that work over the last few months of the crisis is we've recruited 50,000 new members. We've recruited 3,500 new workplace reps. We've trained over 3,500 activists in a variety of health and safety and organising strategies. And the union, when it came to the government's demand for wider reopening, we managed to stop 70% of schools opening more widely. So the organising work that we do has an outcome. It's not, we don't organise for the sake of it. We build workplace power in order to keep our members safe, or in order to win things at workplace level, because in England we don't have national bargaining, so we have to win workplace power.
Yeah. So, and I think the way in what you said, like, it's a long-term project, and when I talk, when we have this message, this global message, that we sort of like also say to people, the LA teachers took 4 years when Chicago did it, like in 2009. They also took 3 years to build power, to build those kind of structures. That is a long-term commitment. It's not just you snap your fingers and then like 100,000 Dutch teachers show up for a one-day strike. Maybe that can happen, but it's not really building power. And I think that's the big difference.
And also, we made mistakes. All the way through this process, we got things wrong. And I think it's important for us to always keep reflecting on the work that you do, to go, okay, that didn't go as well. How do we do it better next time? Rather than, resting on your laurels. You have to accept that you've got to take chances. You've got to take risks in order to win. And sometimes they don't work, and that's okay.
Yeah. And Jane, so we're in the middle of unprecedented crisis, the COVID pandemic. So what's your perspective on it? So is the work that you're doing and that John's doing, is it making a difference, or do we need to step up even more? So where are we and where are we going, and what is needed?
I think both are true. In the immediate, our work is definitely adding up. In the United States, all of the same unions that have built to what we call high participation unions, that we call strike-ready unions, meaning they've got 100% worker engagement. There's a rep for every school. There's a communication system that's clear. That is why, in fact, in July, in the state of California, where I focused working with a team of unions in California, including the Los Angeles teachers, the reason why the governor, the elected governor of the state of California, made a fairly early announcement in July that in fact schools would not open was not because the governor had a warm spot for teachers that day. It's because we had begun taking strike votes across some of the biggest unions and saying there are not COVID protections in place. There is not personal protective equipment. We, in most of the big cities in the United States, because of austerity, don't have functioning ventilators, don't have air conditioning, don't have heaters, don't have windows that open. And don't even have like running water, and clean soap in half the building. So when someone says, oh yeah, we can open, we'll just socially distance and keep, kids 10 feet from the students' desks, the teacher said, this is insanity, and began to announce that they were taking strike votes. And very quickly, the governor of the state decided, okay, we're probably not going to open right away. And that was a good start. But by the way, where we're going is we need a hell of a lot of money, because austerity has just decimated the public education system in the United States. And we are in a fight right now on election day in the United States. We may not yet know who the president will be, but on election day in the state of California, I urge every teacher union in the world to pay attention. We are running a ballot initiative to tax corporations, to force them to put money into the education system. And it's high stakes right now in California. And that's our day-to-day work, is taking the same worksite structures that we built for strikes and pouring it into the electoral system to tax corporations, to force them to pay for the education that students of the future will need. So that's the immediate. And then fighting austerity coming out of COVID is going to be a massive fight. And it's not going to happen because teachers are going to nicely ask for more money. We have to tax corporations and the super rich to refund the public education system.
I completely agree, but that's sort of like, it's not as clear cut in Europe, but I think that fight is coming, and it's coming out of 2008, at least in the Netherlands and also a lot of other European countries. Austerity also took a big cut out of education, did a lot of damage. So, John, also to wrap up for you, I'm going back to you. One more question for you, Jane. What's next for the NEU, and where are you in the UK?
I wanted to pick up on something that Jane was mentioning, that idea that it's really important for us as teacher unions, and this is something that Andrea Schleicher was talking about a few minutes ago. It's really important for us to put forward that alternative narrative to the current narrative around education and around public services. The crisis of COVID shows us the impact of child poverty, the impact of 10 years of austerity and school unfunding. That's why things have been so bad. And then you look at the exams crisis that we had in this country, and that's caused by the massive over-testing and over-assessing and reductive nature of the school curriculum. So one of the things that we've been talking about now is moving forward from the health and safety focus that we've obviously had over the last few months to both empowering our workplace representatives to begin to bargain about other issues, to look at a year's timetable. So at the moment, we're asking them to bargain around pay. After Christmas, we're asking them to bargain around appraisal. And then come the summer, we're asking them to bargain around workload. So there's a national strategy around bargaining. But also, we're beginning to stress the importance of an alternative narrative around education, a different way of teaching and learning, a different way of funding education. And we've put forward a national recovery plan for education to say these are the things that the government should be focusing on. And it's not just about trying to win that now, it's about beginning to create that narrative over the next few years to say this is how education should be, to build that broader social movement.
Thanks, John. So I think we need to wrap up. So I'm just going to ask Jane maybe one more last comment, and maybe sort of like a call to everybody that they can join Strike School or the next Strike School.
Yeah, well, one, definitely pay attention to Jelmer and John are both involved in Strike School that we're teaching through the Luxembourg Stiftung in Germany. We're definitely going to be focusing more on both how do we improve the collective bargaining practice to get to some of the issues that John was just mentioning. And how do we tie our work? I would say the last crucial thing is we have not made any of the victories we have in the United States in either Chicago or Los Angeles or Oakland or around the country without having deep engagement, not just with every teacher, but with parents and students and the broader community. And that is the forward focus for how we actually make radical improvements to public education again.
Yeah, great. Bargaining for the common good. That's what it's called, right? So thank you so much for joining us and for your always grace with your time. And I hope every teacher picks this up. If you're not part of a union, join one. If you are part of a union, become active in it. Don't third-party the union. The union is your voice. Organize, get your colleagues in, and that's how you build power, and that's kind of how we can build the education systems that our students deserve. So thank you very much for joining us here, and let's go on to the next session.
Very inspiring discussion by Jane, John, and Jelmer. So this is the only way to reduce inequalities is through organizing and trade unions. So in tandem with the COVID-19 pandemic and through the Black Lives Matter movements, protests, and demonstrations, 2020 has also brought to the surface, once again, the centuries-old pandemic of racism and racialized injustices all over the world. In this recorded session, we will be hearing about the racial justice in the times of coronavirus. This highly interesting and significant discussion is moderated by a professor from the Stony Brook University, who is also the CEO of the Digimentors from New York, United States of America, Sri Srinivasan. The speakers are the president of the National Education Association from the United States of America, Becky Pringle, and the president of the NAS-UWT, the Teachers Union from the United Kingdom, Michelle Codrington-Rogers.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very important session on racial justice in the time of COVID. My name is Sri Srinivasan, and I'm the Marshall Loeb Visiting Professor of Digital Innovation at Stony Brook School of Journalism. We have a terrific session here where you will get to meet two leaders who are working on education issues at the union levels, both in the US and the UK. Now, what we want everybody to know is that this is an opportunity to understand what is happening with racial justice in the field of education. And we have two wonderful speakers who will reflect on racial justice and what decolonizing education means in their respective countries, especially in the current moment, and the role that education unions can and should play in those processes. So let's bring on stage and tell you about our two speakers. We have with us Becky Pringle, who's president of the National Education Association in the United States, and Michelle Codrington-Rogers, president of the NASUWT Teachers Union in the UK. Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for being here. Really appreciate you making the time, and happy World Teachers Day.
Same to you.
Thank you.
Happy World Teachers Day.
Let's get right to it. I have a question that I'd like both of you to answer. We'll go to Becky first. What does it mean to think about racial justice at this moment and decolonizing education in a general sense in the UK and the US? Becky, about the US, of course. And what new insights or impetus has come from the Black Lives Matter movement of the last few months?
So thank you, Sri. It's so good to be here with you and Michelle, celebrating World Teacher Day with EI. So here in the US, we understand the importance of decolonizing education. And for us, that means we have to radically change and transform the operationalizing of our schools. And we have to make sure that we fully support our staff and educators. It actually requires a thorough assessment in response to the historical impact of race and racism in the design and the development and the evolution of our current education system. It also includes the historic connections to global colonization and imperialism and the ideology of white supremacy. So in this moment of COVID, we've been talking about this so much here in the US. It is shining a light on structural racism. And structural for us, we're not only talking about education, we're talking about all of those other systems that impact our students' ability to learn. So we're talking about economic injustice. We're talking about housing injustice. We're talking about healthcare injustice. All of those things came together to impact what happened with COVID. We know that our Black and Brown and Indigenous students and communities were disproportionately impacted and infected with this disease, and they disproportionately died from it because they were already predisposed with illnesses because of the lack of healthcare in those communities. And then when we had to, at a moment's notice here in the US, go to virtual learning, we saw that light shining, and it only exacerbated the inequities that as educators, we already knew existed. So we knew there was a digital gap. We knew that our Black and Brown and Indigenous students didn't have access to digital tools in their homes. We knew that they had parents who were essential workers and had to go out to work, but not stay home with them to help with their learning. So we are seeing those gaps grow and grow. And what we are doing here at the National Education Association is working to try to continue not only to stand in those gaps right now, but actually to do the work now, to transform our system so that it is racially and socially equitable and just, so that every student, everyone, has the opportunity to succeed in this diverse and interdependent world.
Thank you. So beautifully put. And that gives us a sense from this side of the pond. I'm in New York, so we will claim you over here, Becky. And now we'll go across the Atlantic Ocean to Michelle.
Thank you, Sri. And Becky, excellent. That is very, actually mirrors what is happening in the UK. I'd like to thank EI for enabling this conversation, and happy World Teachers' Day to everybody as well. Because exactly that is what happened in the UK. Unfortunately, it took us going into lockdown. It took us seeing education shut down in the UK for this real stark division between our communities to become very evident and obvious. And what happened was COVID gave us the space for us to stop and to start to actually see the impact. When you're in busy lives, you don't notice the social injustice as starkly as you do when you have got whole households and communities locked indoors. And those months since March the 20th, when schools kind of closed, was the time when people started to recognize all those issues that we have been raising as educators and as teachers, but also as activists, to say that social injustice is really quite prominent. And kind of combining that with Black Lives Matters being reinvigorated, the debate meant that more people were able to engage with what had been campaigned on in relation to the disproportional impact of the systemic and systematic racism, institutionalized prejudice and discrimination, and the impact it has on Black lives in the UK. The pandemic as well exacerbated that disproportionality. And we're now in 50 years since the published book written by Bernard Coad, which is How the West Indian Child is Made Subhuman or Subnormal by the British education system. And to go back and to see where we have got to now in 2020, we see that very little has changed. Black children and Black teachers are still not just underrepresented or given a disservice by the education system in the UK, but in most cases, their chances and their life experiences are being impacted directly. And NASUWT worked with an organization called Runnymede and published a report in 2017 called Visible Minorities, Invisible Teachers, which reflected on the experiences of Black teachers and minority ethnic teachers in the UK. And it was stark. And in those 3 years, nothing has changed. And what we're seeing is that if our children and young people aren't seeing themselves reflected, not just in the curriculum, but by the people standing in front of them, then it actually does have a direct impact on their not just their experiences of the education system, but also their aspiration of what options do they have. And as part of the kind of the debate that blew up in the UK around Black Lives Matters and what does that mean in the UK, but especially in relation to education, we saw lots of people, lots of campaigns that have been campaigning for years be spotlighted when it comes to Black history and the importance of communities and cultures knowing their history and seeing it reflected in their everyday life experiences. And one of the arguments that I made was that it's not just about history. We have to make sure that there's Black visibility, to make sure that children and young people see their options and their opportunities. And it shouldn't take the murder of or the trauma on a Black body for a system in education in particular to reflect, to think about what message are they given to children and young people, but also to the communities that we serve. And we have to think about visibility, and I think it's more than a hashtag. And when it also means that when organizations show support for example, Black Lives Matters, or at the moment, we've just started Black History Month in the UK. Our Black History Month is in October, and we see organizations and the government, kind of quoting hashtag Black History Month. Actually, if organizations aren't forced to reflect on how their systems in place do a disservice to the Black and minority ethnic communities, then they're not doing the work. So I think as unions, we have got a huge job to do to make sure that we are not just challenging schools and our education system that we work within, but the systems where we puzzle piece into for them to start doing the work as well. And it's uncomfortable and it's challenging. But I think we, as educators, we've not just got to look within ourselves and our own system, but we've got to use that pressure to ensure that there's that campaign, that global campaign for social justice.
Thank you so much. Before I ask Michelle another question, I just want to ask Becky to kind of reflect on what you just heard. It sounds so familiar, painfully familiar to us here in the United States.
It absolutely does. You probably saw me shaking my head the whole time Michelle was speaking, because here's the thing. Not only do we have to lead as unions, we have to do the work ourselves. We have to do the work ourselves. We are a system as well. In 2015, the NEA convention, our large convention of 10,000 delegates, came together and passed the new business item to take on, committing the organization to take on institutional racism. That was 5 years ago. And it did position us to do the work. And we talked about the first thing we have to do is that we have to, all of us, commit to get on that journey of awareness. So we understand the things that Michelle just talked about, that we are talking about, because we've not been taught that history. We've been taught an incomplete history here in the US. And we have to expand our knowledge. And then we have to build our capacity. We have to build our racial justice muscle in a way we never have before. 5 years ago, when Michael Brown was murdered by police, we could not say affirmatively that Black lives matter. Now, after the killing of George Floyd, our state affiliates, one after the other, actually issued statements and affirmatively said Black lives matter. Those words matter. Being able to say that out loud and then to commit yourself to do the work, to learn, so that you can lead and take action to actually dismantle these systems, to actually take on the white supremacy culture that exists throughout our country, to actually be able to change the preparation of teachers, to take on, to Michelle's point, the recruitment, and not just the recruitment, because what Michelle talked about is really important. Not only is it about recruiting teachers of color, but it is about retaining them, because what we find is that when they get into the profession, particularly when they are in environments that are not supportive of them as Black teachers, as Indigenous teachers, we find that they leave the profession. So we have to support them in a way that they stay in the profession. We must do the work to prepare all teachers, to prepare our white allies, so that we are ensured that we are creating a culturally responsive learning environment for all of our students.
Thank you. I just want to reflect for a moment, both of you, just to see that the two of you are leading these two unions. This is a special moment, isn't it?
Well, I'm the first Black president ever in the history of NASUWT. This is 101 years our union has existed, and that's a weight. It is a huge weight to carry. But it also shows that when an organization looks within itself and starts to do the work, I'm not saying that it's perfect, and I think I'd be quite honest to say that, but actually it shows that when a union does the work, it can create that space for people to be able to be leaders and to be able to achieve to their potential. But we've got work to do, absolutely.
I wanted to ask specifically about the UK. There's been a lot of talk about decolonizing education, and a lot of that has been kind of focused on removing statues. We have a separate statue conversation here as well, but there's much more than that. And so what are some specific things that connect decolonizing and racial justice that you can tell us?
I think Becky kind of touched on it earlier, is the fact that we're not taught the uncomfortable past, and that's none more prevalent in the UK. The UK, that was the leader of colonization and empire building, which was traumatic, and it was built on pain and destruction of cultures and communities and history. But we're not taught that in school. Our children and young people are literally just taught pretty much about slavery, one of the most traumatic aspects of our past, and especially for our communities. However, we are surrounded by the kind of the spoils of that period of time of empire. We're surrounded by monuments to people who, from the majority of us walking around in the UK, don't know who they are. And then when you start scratching the surface and realizing that people have got this connection to trauma, and we have to keep remembering it is about trauma, and it is carried into generationally, you know, it's easier to argue about whether a statue should remain, as opposed to saying, why didn't we learn the truth about this era? So although the kind of the reporting is very much, do we keep the statue, do we get rid of it? It's actually more of a case of, what does the statue symbolize, and what other actions need to be taken to kind of remedy this disproportionate or kind of unbalanced version of history, so that we are learning it. And so the statues are just a symbol, but it's easier to get pulled into that debate, and it has to be, what else needs to be done? And these statues stand in very prominent places outside very prominent symbols of the British Empire and British success. And we have to think, how did Britain get to be so successful? What was it built on? And what does it owe to the rest of the world and to other cultures and to other communities, because it benefited based on that trauma? And so schools have got a place to play in that, but so do universities, so do other structural organizations, but it has to start in the places of education. Our children need to know what they're looking at.
Thank you very much. Our final question to Becky, I just want to ask you about the kind of political resistance that now we're seeing, as you know, more and more people are saying Black Lives Matter, as you indicated. We're also seeing some resistance. And in this country, we're also seeing that this idea that this country was built on the profits of slavery is being pushed back, that we want to, instead of thinking about the 1619 project, it's more important to think about the 1776 project. So without getting into the politics of it, what can we say to our teachers watching today, the allies of teachers, parents, students, and everyone who cares about this topic? What is your message to everyone?
Educate yourself. My father was a history teacher. I'm a science teacher, and I didn't much care for history, but he didn't much care that I didn't care. And he sat me down and he filled in the gaps for me. So I'm not, Michelle, I'm not the first Black president, I'm the fifth. But it doesn't change the reality that in this moment, as Black leaders, we know that there will be resistance and there will be pushback. In the US, we have but to look at our history. When we think about the 13th Amendment, abolishing slavery, and if our listeners have not had the opportunity to watch the Ava DuVernay documentary 13th, they must. Because what it talks about is that clause in the 13th Amendment that abolishes slavery, that talks about, as punishment for crime of the party, they shall be duly convicted. And that was used to continue to enslave Black people. And for us, we talk about that as fueling the school to prison pipeline in this moment, as criminalizing Black Americans and them being disproportionately represented in the criminal justice system and in prisons. We need to know that history. We need to understand what happened after the Civil War. We need to know what happened in Reconstruction, and we need to be aware of the fact that that violence was at the highest level during that time. And so there will be a lot of resistance, and we have to be prepared for that resistance in this moment. And the best way is to be educated. If you know your history, if you know the history, then you are not, as my father reminded me all the time, if we don't know our history, we are doomed to repeat it. So as educators, as unions, we need to continue to learn and grow and act And that includes transforming not only our public education system, it means transforming our unions, it means transforming the preparation of our teachers and other educators. It means partnering with organizations not only here in the US, but clearly around the world to finally bring to bear racial justice in this world.
Beautifully put. And on that note, we will end this. As you know, it's a very busy day at World Teachers Day. And thank you very much. Our guests have been Becky Pringle, President of the National Education Association in the United States, and Michelle Codrington-Rogers, the President of the NASUWT, the Teachers Union in the United Kingdom. Thank you very much, all of you, for watching. And please keep sharing this feed so everyone can see.
That was an amazing discussion. And once again, it was underlining the important role of the teacher unions in the reduction of and fight against social injustices and inequalities. We will now continue to the Europe segment of this 24-hour live online event with 4 videos from Sweden, Italy, and Portugal, hearing the voices of the teachers and unions across Europe.
Eu posso identificar muito depressa as 3 ou 4 pessoas que foram fundamentais na minha formação enquanto ser humano. E a Maria de Lourdes Varela foi seguramente uma das pessoas mais importantes da minha vida. A minha professora primária, a mulher mais extraordinária do mundo, a mulher que nos ralhava e que ria connosco e que nos ensinou a primeira frase que eu soube escrever, que é: eu acordo sempre cedo num dia de verão. Nunca mais me esqueci. E que nos leu o João Sem Medo, e que nos levou através das letras e das matemáticas e do mundo misterioso, e que me mudou a vida e me marcou para sempre. Obrigada, professor.
Jag är flöjtlärare på Kulturskolan i Fagersta. När jag undervisar så står jag ofta nära mina elever. Vi läser på samma notställ, eller så står vi mitt emot varandra och gör övningar. I höst har jag fått den här plexiglasskivan som hänger i taket i mitt rum. Den är höj- och sänkbar eftersom eleverna är olika stora. Och den gör att vi kan stå mitt emot varandra och spela utan att blåsa varandra rakt i ansiktet. Den gör också att vi tänker på att vi ska hålla avstånd mer än vad vi brukar göra. Det är ju inte alltid jag är här inne. Ibland är vi på andra ställen. Och då har jag den här mobila skyddet. Det är en plexiglasskiva som sitter fast på ett notställsben. Och det är väldigt enkelt att frakta med sig eller ställa i en annan lokal. I Västmanland så har vi en regional kulturskola. Vi brukar träffas ett par gånger om året, alla musik- och kulturskolelärare. De senaste gångerna så har vi träffats digitalt, både för stora föreläsningar och för diskussioner i lite mindre grupper. Där har jag kunnat träffa mina flöjtlärarkollegor i länet och vi har kunnat prata om det som är viktigt i pandemin för just oss. Det har varit väldigt givande att träffa dem på det sättet, och när pandemin är över så kommer vi antagligen att fortsätta att träffas för att prata om just våra ämnesspecifika frågor. Det hoppas jag är att det är något bra som kommer ut i slutändan av den här pandemin.
School in Pakistan wishes to convey all the teachers in the world on such special and essential occasion. Happy Teachers' Day. It's fact that the teachers are always doing exemplary job. Even during pandemic, the teachers are doubling their great effort by discovering different ways to connect with pupils to express education. The knowledge, the love, the care which are shared by teachers inspire the world with gorgeous future. Dear teachers, let's thankful for all your efforts. Happy Teachers!
Well, wasn't that great? Colleagues, comrades and friends, we're close to the end of our European segment, but we have just one last message, and this comes to us from Sweden. It comes from Johanna Jarstrand, who is a member of the executive board and, of course, is a leader in Lärarförbundet Sweden.
This year, 2020, did not turn out the way we planned to. COVID-19 has had and still has an enormous negative impact on the life of families and societies all over the world. I would like to ask you, Johanna Jarstrand, the president of Swedish Teachers Union, Lärarförbundet, a bit about what has happened in Sweden.
Well, first of all, in Sweden we have not experienced the total lockdown that happened in many other countries. However, the strict recommendations on social distancing, hygiene, travel and gatherings have been similar to those practiced in other parts of the world.
How did your members, Swedish teachers, react and act in this situation?
School leaders and teachers have really taken on the challenges of reorganizing work, creating a safe learning environment, helping each other and contributing to a sense of normality during this crisis for children and pupils. And they have met pupils and parents in their worries while having to handle the concerns of their own health and that of their family.
And you as a union, how have you worked during this period?
I guess as all other unions, we have had to fight for just conditions for our members in an entirely new situation. And I really would like to highlight the work of our members and union representatives. The pandemic has brought new issues to the social dialogue with the employer, new risks to assess and manage together with colleagues. And Lärarförbundet has developed the tools to facilitate this work, but it has been done in the workplaces.
Are there lessons learned that you believe that we as the teaching profession and organizations should carry with us for the future?
Yes, I think we've learned during this period is that the measures taken by union in a crisis need to be contextual. We have discussed and we have shared experiences with sister unions in Education International. We have learned from each other, but we have not copied each other's solutions. And I've been so impressed by all the examples of teachers' initiatives and leadership. We have seen the importance of positive feedback, of lifting each other up, and recognizing what teachers contribute to society and the leadership of this profession.
Well, that's it. Thank you, colleagues from the European section. So on behalf of my co-presenter, Süleyman Gelener, and also on behalf of Christian, of course, who had to go and teach, so he couldn't stay with us till the end. It's a wrap from all of the members, organizations, all of the individuals, and all of our guests here in Europe. I think it's been absolutely great, and I leave you with this. Happy World Teachers' Day and solidarity. Back to you, David.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Süleyman. And thank you, Christian. Thank you, Europe, for a fantastic segment. That was just phenomenal. So much for us. It's almost hard to take it all in. Just such a brilliant segment. So now we have the pleasure of having a conversation with the leader of the International Trade Union Confederation, Sharon Burrow. So I'd like to ask Sharon to join me out here. Just say a few words about Sharon. Is not only is she a friend, not only is she a mentor, but she's one of us, guys. She comes from us. She was on the EI executive board. She is a teacher who made the union her life and then rose to the ranks all the way up to the very top and is the general secretary of the ITUCE, leading the global trade union movement, representing us in the halls of power, but never forgetting her organizing roots and always mentoring certain young general secretaries along the way, which is deeply appreciated. So Sharon, welcome. It's great to have you with us.
It's great to be with you, David. Happy Teachers' Day.
Just couldn't, we have the sound? Making sure they can hear you.
So try again?
Yeah, try again.
Okay. It's great to be with you. Happy Teachers' Day. And particularly can I shout out to those amazing teachers, not just all over the world, but in my own country, Australia. Wrong time zone, I know, but you know, your roots are your roots. And frankly, the Australian Education Union and my home base of New South Wales, I learned all the lessons in life, really, at a very young age as a teacher unionist, and of course, as a professional, that have held me in good stead.
Well, I know that Susan and Angelo and all of your friends in Australia are watching even this late hour. We've been up now for well over 24 hours in this World Teachers' Day celebration event, organizing moment, clarifying moment, reflective moment, bringing together our allies as you are to talk about where we are, what we've learned through the pandemic, and what we need to do as a result of that. So I'm going to be very sort of pointed with my first question to you, Sharon. You're out, you're on panels and Zooming every day, talking to world leaders, talking to the heads of international organizations. You know about the debt crisis. You know about the austerity issues. You know about the rising in poverty and unemployment. Can you help us sort of map out where do we need to go from here? What has to happen now?
So we were already in a convergence of crisis, David. Of course, we had historic levels of inequality. Teachers saw that every day in their classrooms. Their parents saw it in the world of work, and the income share for working people since the slashing of the social contract in the early 90s has been like a big dipper. So inequality, the climate emergency, again, teachers understand the importance of environmental education, and we count on young people today to do what the generations haven't been able to do before, and that's actually stabilize the planet and allow us to create jobs on a living planet for the future. But then the context of COVID-19, let me first of all say a huge thank you and unbelievable outpourings of respect from all over the world for teachers who were one of the groups on the front lines. You kept the world going, whether it was virtual, whether it was in person, just as those people who went to work in the supermarkets and of course our treasured health professionals, risking your lives and learning very quickly to pivot your world to meet the test. Although I just heard from a friend, actually, Will.i.am, in another conversation we were having, and you'd all probably know Will from the Black Eyed Peas. He told the terrible story of disheartenment when people who don't have access to the internet, can't afford Wi-Fi, are hanging out outside Taco Bells and Burger Kings and other such fast food places to get the free Wi-Fi late at night to try and actually keep up with their lessons. So teachers, big applause. But now we have an economic and social crisis that unless we rebuild the social contract, unless we have a new social contract with recovery and resilience, and of course that means, David, jobs, jobs and jobs, climate-friendly jobs. It means universal social protection, and we're fighting for a global social protection fund for the poorest of countries. 500 million jobs lost, 1.6 billion facing destitution in the informal economy. But that must include funding for our vital public services, for the care economy, and of course, health, education, childcare, aged care, all of the things that make us strong as a community.
So do you think that the political will is now here in the face of this crisis to actually make that social contract happen? Are we in a different moment due to the sort of the corporate profiteers and those that have sort of found ways to sort of offshore their wealth and not pay their taxes, just sort of benefit off public services without paying their due, to fight our attempts to get basic human rights and labor rights and women's rights? Are you feeling like they're on the ropes, that they get it, that this is something, that this is a moment that we're going to be able to break through?
I wish I could say unequivocally yes. Do I think we can break through? Absolutely. Do I think that our political leaders are there? There are two camps. We've won the battle internationally, and I hope we can win it in every country. And I know you're going to be talking to the president of Argentina, and the Argentinian unions have won it there, where their government's committed to a new social contract. You hear the language everywhere. You hear the commitment to universal social protection, but walking the talk, we've spent about up to 18 trillion already through this crisis, and unions have a lot to be proud of. I just heard one of your colleagues say that from Europe. The support you won for teachers and students, and of course other unions, for parents on the front line or having lost their jobs, these are massive advances on the social contract. But do I think that our government leaders, when again you've got the corporate sector divided too, there is one group of corporates who know the world has to change, who are working with us, but they're more real economy people. If you look at the profiteers, the big tech companies eroding privacy, putting in place unacceptable surveillance. Again, I'm going to quote Will, because we just had this conversation online. Will IAM says we should have an AI constitution. I'm for that. We're all for that. We have to fight for a new social contract that is about the future we want, David. And I'd invite people to say, what is it that they want in their social contract? I'm going to actually send out with David an invitation to you in the coming weeks. Tell us what you want in the social contract for yourselves, your children, your communities, because that's the fight we need to take up. And to be honest, David, it'll be the fight of the generations. We need to bring every generation into this struggle. We need never again to go back to austerity and the despair that people were feeling even before COVID-19, when we saw people on the streets in every continent angry about the way their democracies were heading, or the growth in authoritarianism, which is writ large around the world. And I'm sure you've heard a lot about those countries today. So can we win? Absolutely, because the power of working people, the power of the unions, is what we always use. If you look at the peace struggles from Belarus to Brazil to many parts of the world, Philippines, India, but you also then look at who's on the front lines. It's workers, it's working people, it's their unions. And I know the power of the teacher unions. So we want to win new standards around telework. Again, talk to Argentina, first in line. We want to win new standards around funding the digital future that is a positive future for our students. teachers will be there. And I know that they'll join the rest of the movement to fight for that new social contract that gives us jobs, just transition, an inclusive future for women, for race, as well as for equality.
Thank you, Sharon. And I don't think it's by chance, and Sharon and I've talked about this before, that the countries that are leading the way happen to be led by women. So I think it's time for many of us men to make room and listen up, like we just done with Sharon. Thank you so much for being with us. Really appreciate the time you've taken. And we're all together because unity is so important in this moment. All of us workers, all of us unionists, all of us communities, people together, moving forward, taking the lead for the future we want. Thank you so much. This was a fantastic segment. I want to thank everybody here in Europe for just bringing together a very meaningful conversation that we need to take forward. Now we are going to be going into Latin America, but before we go into Latin America, where I'll see you after the break, we need to take a quick break so that we can refresh the streams. So you will go off and join again because you'll need to refresh, but those of you who've been with us for 24 hours already know how to do this. So, hasta pronto, hasta la victoria, nos vemos en América Latina. Abrazos.